Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, and I will sin, and I won't regret. Modern Queen Tales presents Queen of All Pirates. The stones of St. Jude's Convent held the cold of centuries, pressing against my knees with a relentless, biting dampness. For 10 years, those stones were the only grounding I had, the only reality besides the suffocating scent of incense and the endless drone of chanted prayers. I knelt in the shadowy alcove of the chapel, the rough wool of my habit scratching at the skin I had scrubbed raw earlier that evening. The single, flickering candle before the icon of the Virgin cast long, distorted shadows across the altar, making the painted faces of the saints seem to sneer in judgment. My name was Sister Maria Aglietti then, a name chosen for its association with purity and martyrdom, but beneath the suffocating layers of black and white, the blood of Isabella Warren boiled. The fire hadn't been extinguished by the constant fasting, or the hours spent in silent contemplation. It had only been compressed, waiting for the right moment to ignite. That moment arrived with the tolling of the midnight bell. It was the signal for matins, the time when the sisters would gather, a flock of silent ravens in the dim light, to chant the psalms. But tonight, I didn't rise to join them. I remained kneeling, listening to the soft shuffle of sandals receding down the stone corridor. I waited until the heavy oak door of the chapel groaned shut, leaving me alone with the flickering candle and the echoing silence. I stood, my joints aching from hours of stillness. I moved with a practiced, predatory silence, a skill honed by years of avoiding the watchful eyes of Mother Superior. I slipped through a side door, a door meant only for the maintenance of the sanctuary lamps, and stepped into the cloister garden. The night air hit me like a physical blow, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant, intoxicating tang of salt water, the sea. It was a constant presence, a restless giant breathing just beyond the convent walls, a reminder of the vast, chaotic world I was forbidden to touch. The escape route had been meticulously planned over months of stolen glances and whispered observations. A loose stone in the outer wall, near the overgrown patch of climbing roses, provided the necessary foothold. I scrambled up, ignoring the thorns tearing at my habit and the skin beneath. I swung a leg over the top, balancing precariously on the rough masonry, and looked down. The drop was sheer, ending in a tangle of gorse and uneven ground leading down to the cliffs. I didn't hesitate. I dropped, the impact jarring my teeth, a sharp pain shooting up my legs. I was free. The descent to the docks was a desperate scramble through darkness and uneven terrain. The sounds of the sea grew louder, a roaring rhythmic symphony that drowned out the frantic beating of my heart. I reached the edge of the harbor town just as the first gray light began to bleed into the eastern sky. The town was a chaotic sprawl of taverns, brothels, and warehouses, a stark contrast to the ordered sterility of St. Jude's. The smell of rotting fish, spilled ale, and unwashed bodies replaced the cloying incense. I moved quickly through the narrow, winding streets, keeping to the shadows. My habit, once a symbol of devotion, was now a dangerous beacon. I needed a ship. Any ship that would take me far away from the convent's grasp. I found myself at the end of a long, wooden pier, staring at a massive galleon, its dark hull imposing even in the dim light. The ship smelled of tar, old wood, and danger. A voice, rough and deep as grinding stones, shattered the silence. "Lost your flock, little lamb?" I spun around. A man leaned against a piling, a silhouette against the lightening sky. As he stepped forward, the Aglietti meager light revealed a face weathered by sun and salt, a scar slashing across his left cheek, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He wore a heavy leather coat over a linen shirt, and a cutlass hung casually at his hip. He was a pirate, one of the outcasts the sisters prayed against. I am looking for passage, I said, my voice surprisingly steady considering the trembling in my hands. I forced my shoulders back, pulling the remnants of my dignity tightly around me. I met his gaze squarely, refusing to flinch. Passage? He let out a harsh bark of laughter. This ain't a passenger vessel, sister. We deal in different cargo. He looked me up and down, a slow, appraising glance that made my skin crawl. What can a holy woman offer the likes of us? I can offer a mind sharper than any blade on this ship, I replied, the words a challenge. I can navigate by the stars. I can calculate trajectories and provisions. I spent 10 years studying the heavens and the earth while you lot were busy looting and drinking. He raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering in his stormy eyes. Bold words for a woman wearing the cloth of the church. But words won't swab a deck or reef a sail. I am a quick learner, I said, my jaw tightening, and I have nothing left to lose. He studied me for a long moment, the silence stretching taut between us. My name is Captain Oliver Pritchard, he finally said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. And this is the Fortune Bringer. You can come aboard, sister, but understand this. On this ship, there is no God but the sea, and no law but mine. You earn your keep, or you go over the side. Understood? Understood, I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. I turned my back on the town, on the convent, on the life of Sister Maria Aglietti, and walked up the gangplank of the Fortune Bringer. The transition from holy woman to pirate was brutal. The heavy woolen robes of my habit were the first things to go. I traded them for a canvas shirt, sturdy breeches, and leather boots, clothes I bartered for with a gold cross I had secreted away years ago. The physical change was liberating, a shedding of the suffocating weight I had carried for so long. But the real transformation happened beneath the surface. The discipline instilled by the monastery, the hours of silent endurance, the rigid adherence to order these proved to be the perfect foundation for life on a pirate ship. I approached my new life with the same meticulous calculation I had applied to the copying of illuminated manuscripts. The crew, a motley collection of cutthroats and thieves, viewed me with suspicion and open hostility. I was an anomaly, a woman among men, a holy figure in a den of iniquity. They tested me at every turn, assigning me the most grueling tasks, the filthiest jobs. I scrubbed the decks until my hands bled, hauled on ropes until my muscles screamed, and learned the intricacies of the rigging under the unforgiving sun. I never complained. I never showed weakness. I met their jeers with cold, silent stares, channeling the intimidating presence of Mother Superior into a weapon of my own. When a burly sailor named Grimsby tried to corner me below decks, I used the element of surprise and a heavy iron belaying pin to break his arm. The dull crack echoed through the hold, a stark declaration of my boundaries. Captain Pritchard watched my progress with a detached, calculating gaze. He never intervened, never offered assistance. He was testing me, waiting to see if I would crack under the pressure. I didn't. I thrived. My knowledge of navigation, gleaned from years of studying the dusty tomes in the convent library, quickly proved invaluable. The ship's quartermaster, a grizzled old man named Elias, had grown half-blind and unreliable. I began assisting him, pointing out subtle shifts in the stars, calculating our position with a precision that left him bewildered. Within months, I had replaced him. I stood beside Captain Pritchard at the helm, charting our course, analyzing weather patterns, and anticipating the movements of merchant vessels. I learned to read the sea like I had once read scripture, deciphering its moods and utilizing its currents to our advantage. The crew's respect came slowly, grudgingly. It was earned through competence, a cold, calculating intelligence, and a refusal to bow to any man. I became a fixture on the quarterdeck, a silent, imposing presence, my dark hair tied back tightly, a cutlass strapped to my side. I was no longer Sister Maria Aglietti. I was Isabella Warren, the navigator of the Fortune Bringer. Yet, the transition was not without its internal struggles. The psychological tension was a constant, low-level ache. I still heard hymns echoing in my mind when the wind howled through the rigging. The scent of salt and tar sometimes triggered a visceral memory of incense. I was a woman commanding a deck of sinners, a woman who had abandoned her vows to embrace a life of violence and plunder. The guilt, a heavy, familiar companion, gnawed at me during the long, quiet watches. I found myself silently reciting prayers, seeking absolution for the blood that stained my hands. The moral weight of my new life was immense, a constant counterbalance to the intoxicating power of the freedom I had claimed. This internal conflict was complicated further by Captain Oliver Pritchard. He was a man of contradictions, brutal yet surprisingly intelligent, ruthless yet possessing a strange, twisted code of honor. We spent hours together in his cabin, poring over charts, planning raids, analyzing the movements of the Spanish fleet. The proximity, the shared danger, the intellectual challenge we presented to each other, it sparked a fire between us, a dangerous, forbidden romance. It began with subtle glances, lingering touches, and a tension that hummed in the air whenever we were near. One evening, after a particularly lucrative raid on a Portuguese galleon, we found ourselves alone on the quarterdeck. The crew was celebrating below, their raucous laughter drifting up on the warm night air. The moon cast a silver path across the dark water, illuminating the sharp angles of Pritchard's face. "You are a strange creature, Isabella," he said, his voice a low rumble blending with the sound of the waves. "You calculate trajectories with the precision of a scholar, yet you fight with the ferocity of a wild dog." "I do what is necessary to survive, Captain," I replied, keeping my gaze fixed on the horizon. He stepped closer, closing the distance between us. I could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the familiar mix of leather, sea salt, and danger. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. The touch sent a jolt of electricity down my spine. "And what is necessary tonight, Isabella?" he murmured, his stormy eyes locking onto mine. The kiss was sudden, fierce, and demanding. It was a clash of wills, a desperate grasping for connection in a world defined by violence. I responded with equal ferocity, pouring all my pent-up passion, all my lingering guilt, all my defiance into the embrace. Our romance was a secret, hidden from the crew, a turbulent undercurrent beneath the surface of our professional relationship. It challenged my commitment to my past and my future. I was drawn to his strength, his intelligence, his unapologetic nature. Yet, I recognized the danger he represented. He was a man who lived by his own rules, a man who could easily destroy the carefully constructed fortress of my new life. I had to balance the moral weight of my actions, the intoxicating power of my growing authority, and the complicated reality of my feelings for Pritchard. It was a delicate dance, a constant negotiation between the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. The turning point arrived with the discovery of the Santa Victoria, a massive Spanish treasure galleon, heavily armed and laden with gold destined for the Empire's coffers. It was a prize beyond imagination, a prize that could secure our future and cement the Fortune Bringer's reputation as the most feared ship on the sea. But the Santa Victoria was not just any ship. The intelligence we gathered revealed that a significant portion of its cargo was destined for the Archbishop of Seville. the very man who funded the expansion of St. Jude's Convent. The empire that had imprisoned me was now sailing into my grasp. The heist required a daring, intricate plan. The galleon was escorted by 2 smaller warships, a formidable convoy that would annihilate the fortune bringer in a direct confrontation. We needed strategy, deception, and a deep understanding of our enemy. I locked myself in my cabin for 2 days, poring over charts, analyzing tidal patterns, and reviewing the theological texts I had committed to memory. I understood the Spanish mindset, their reliance on ritual, their deeply ingrained superstitions. I would use their faith against them. We intercepted the convoy in the treacherous waters off the coast of the Azores. It was a moonless night, the sea a churning expanse of black ink. I had instructed the crew to paint the hull of the fortune bringer completely black, rendering us virtually invisible in the darkness. We approached the convoy slowly, silently, utilizing the cover of a dense fog bank. I had positioned our ship precisely at the convergence of 2 conflicting currents, a navigational anomaly that the Spanish captains, relying on standard charts, would struggle to manage. As we neared the Santa Victoria, I implemented the final phase of my plan. I had a dozen braziers lit along the deck, filled with a mixture of sulfur and specific herbs I remembered from the convent's apothecary. The thick, acrid smoke billowed outwards, enveloping the galleon in an eerie greenish glow. I stood at the bow, dressed in a long, flowing white gown I had fashioned from a spare sail. I held a large wooden cross aloft, an imposing figure illuminated by the unnatural light. The crew, hidden in the shadows, began to chant a slow, mournful hymn, a twisted echo of the prayers I had once recited. The psychological impact on the Spanish sailors was immediate and devastating. The superstitious men, already unnerved by the fog and the treacherous currents, believed they were witnessing an apparition, a demonic vessel summoned from the depths. Panic swept through the galleon. Orders were ignored, discipline shattered. We struck hard and fast. The fortune bringer emerged from the smoke, our cannons unleashing a devastating broadside that crippled the galleon's main mast. We grappled the ship, and our crew swarmed aboard, capitalizing on the chaos and terror. The battle was brutal, a chaotic melee of clashing steel and desperate cries. I fought alongside Pritchard, my cutlass a blur of motion. I moved with a cold, calculated efficiency, the discipline of my past life guiding my strikes. I felt no remorse, no guilt, only the exhilarating rush of power and the satisfaction of striking a blow against the empire that had sought to break me. The Santa Victoria fell, its vast treasure transferred to our holds. We slipped away into the night, leaving the escort ships floundering in the fog, searching for a ghost ship that had vanished as quickly as it appeared. The heist of the Santa Victoria elevated my status from navigator to a figure of legend. The tale of the demon nun who had outsmarted the Spanish fleet spread rapidly among the pirate enclaves scattered across the Caribbean. I was no longer just Isabella Warren. I was becoming a symbol of rebellion, a leader in my own right. The influx of wealth provided the means to achieve my ultimate goal. I wanted more than just a single ship. I wanted an armada. The scattered pirate fleets, independent and often at war with each other, were vulnerable. They needed a unifying force, a leader who could combine their strength and forge a formidable power. I began systematically reaching out to the most powerful captains, utilizing a combination of diplomacy, bribery, and intimidation. I orchestrated meetings in hidden coves, negotiating alliances and outlining a vision of a unified pirate confederacy, a force strong enough to challenge the navies of the world. Pritchard was initially skeptical, his independent nature rebelling against the idea of a larger organization. But he recognized the strategic brilliance of my plan, and his respect for me, both as a leader and a partner, overrode his doubts. He stood by my side as I consolidated the fleets, his presence adding weight to my authority. The process was arduous. It required managing colossal egos, settling ancient feuds, and establishing a strict code of conduct. I implemented a system of laws based on a twisted interpretation of the rules I had lived by in the convent, substituting religious devotion with absolute loyalty to the Confederacy. I created a new order, a sovereign nation on the high seas, an empire built on iron and grace. My transformation was complete. I was no longer the conflicted woman navigating guilt and freedom. I was the sovereign sea queen, commanding an armada of outcasts, a force to be reckoned with. I wore a crimson coat, a symbol of my authority, and a cutlass that never left my side. The final confrontation was inevitable. The Spanish Empire, furious over the loss of the Santa Victoria and the growing power of the pirate confederacy, dispatched a massive armada to crush us. It was a fleet of unprecedented size, a floating fortress designed to annihilate everything in its path. We met them in a vast, open stretch of the Caribbean, a clash of empires that would determine the future of the sea. The Spanish fleet was rigid, disciplined, and heavily armed. We were a chaotic, unpredictable swarm, bound together by loyalty and a desperate desire for survival. The battle raged for 3 days, a terrifying symphony of cannon fire, splintering wood, and screams. I commanded the Confederacy from the deck of the Fortune Bringer, my mind a whirlwind of tactical calculations. I anticipated the Spanish maneuvers, exploiting their rigid adherence to traditional naval warfare. We used speed, agility, and a ruthless disregard for the rules of engagement. I ordered coordinate attacks, isolating their larger galleons and swarming them with smaller, faster vessels. We utilized fire ships, rudimentary explosives, and a relentless, terrifying aggression that slowly broke the Spanish lines. The climax of the battle occurred when the Fortune Bringer engaged the Spanish flagship, the San Cristobal, a massive, floating citadel. It was a brutal, close-quarters slugfest, the two ships locked together in a deadly embrace. I led the boarding party, my crimson coat stained with powder and blood. I fought my way across the deck, my cutlass an extension of my will. I confronted the Spanish admiral, a man resplendent in armor and arrogance, a symbol of the empire I had escaped. Our duel was brief and decisive. I anticipated his strike, sidestepped his heavy sword, and drove my cutlass through the gap in his armor. He fell, the life draining from his eyes, a tangible symbol of our victory. The Spanish armada broke and fled, their spirit shattered. The sea was ours. In the aftermath of the battle, as the smoke cleared and the sea calmed, I stood on the quarterdeck of the Fortune Bringer, surveying the battered but victorious Confederacy. We had established a new law on the high seas, a realm where the discarded, the forgotten, and the rebellious could find their true purpose. We created an enclave on a hidden island, a sanctuary where our laws prevailed, a society built on mutual respect and shared defiance. It was a stark contrast to the sterile halls of St. Jude's, a vibrant, chaotic testament to the power of self-determination. My journey from Sister Maria Aglietti to the sovereign sea queen was complete. I had shed the suffocating robes of obedience and claimed the mantle of leadership. The scars of my past remained, a reminder of the fire that had fueled my escape, but they were no longer a source of pain. They were a testament to my resilience. The sea, vast and unforgiving, was my domain. The rhythmic crash of the waves against the hull was a constant reminder of the freedom I had seized, a freedom born from defiance and forged in fire. This was my legacy, a kingdom built not on pious submission, but on the unyielding strength of a spirit that refused to be contained. My throne was the quarterdeck, my crown the salt spray, and my domain the endless, beautiful expanse of the ocean, the end. Modern Queen Tales presents The Heart of the Matter. The darkness pressed against my eyes with the weight of a lead apron. A persistent, rhythmic beeping drilled into my skull, anchoring my consciousness to a sterile, chilling reality. A sharp, chemical stench of iodine, bleached cotton, and metallic ozone flooded my nostrils. I lay flat on my back on a hard, narrow steel table. Cold air blasted from a ceiling vent directly onto my bare shoulders, raising sharp pricks of goosebumps across my flesh. A voice broke the absolute stillness of the room. William's voice. Time of death, 1432. The words hung in the chilled air, crisp and authoritative. William possessed the practiced, solemn baritone of a chief of cardiothoracic surgery. He used that exact cadence to command operating rooms, soothe anxious families, and charm hospital board members. Today, he used it to declare my life over. Panic ignited in my chest. A sudden flare of heat spiked against the freezing environment. I commanded my eyes to open. The muscles refused to obey. I screamed his name in my mind, demanding an explanation, a reversal, a sign that this was a horrific nightmare. My jaw remained locked, heavy and immovable as a slab of granite. The terrifying truth solidified in my consciousness. I lay entirely paralyzed. I remained trapped inside a body presenting every outward appearance of a corpse. My mind screamed in hyper-vigilant terror. Heavy, purposeful footsteps approached the head of the table. A plastic clipboard scraped against a metal stand. Dr. Royce, the protocol for brain death certification requires a secondary confirmation by an independent neurologist, a second voice stated. A woman. Young, hesitant, carrying the distinct tremor of a junior staff member. Her scrubs rustled as she shifted her weight on the tiled floor. The standard procedure dictates a waiting period. Nurse Hennessy, William interrupted. His tone carried a razor edge of impatience wrapped in professional condescension. My wife suffered a catastrophic subarachnoid hemorrhage. The anoxic brain injury is complete and irreversible. The primary scans confirmed total cessation of neurological function. We are bypassing the redundant waiting period. The lie echoed off the sterile tile walls. The memory of my collapse crashed back into my awareness, a vivid, high-definition replay of the previous evening. We stood in the center of our custom-designed kitchen. The marble countertops reflected the warm amber glow of the pendant lights. William poured a glass of 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon. He handed me the heavy crystal goblet. I drank the wine. A bitter, chalky residue coated my tongue. A harsh metallic tang followed the initial sweetness. 3 minutes later, the kitchen tilted on its axis. My knees buckled, striking the hardwood floor with a bone-jarring thud. The last image seared into my brain before the darkness consumed me featured William. He stood perfectly still by the kitchen island, watching my body hit the floor with cold, clinical detachment. He drugged me. He administered a potent, long-lasting paralytic, masked by a profound sedative, orchestrating the perfect, flawless illusion of brain death. She is a registered organ donor, William continued. The sound of a pen scratching rapidly across paper filled the silence. Her file is updated in the central system. The recipient for her heart is prepped and waiting in OR4. The window for viable tissue transfer is exceptionally narrow. We face a strict timeline. Prepare the sternal saw. My mind recoiled in absolute horror. Falsified records. I explicitly removed my name from the organ registry 3 years ago. I read a harrowing investigative article about medical mistakes and immediately revoked my consent. William knew my stance. He stood in my home office when I tore up the physical donor card. He filed the updated legal directive with our estate lawyer himself. He altered my medical files. The clatter of surgical steel dropping onto a metal Mayo stand echoed through the room. The scrub tech laid out the heavy instruments for the harvest. Forceps clinked against retractors. The heavy, unmistakable thud of the sternal saw hitting the tray vibrated through the metal table beneath me. They prepared to cut my chest open. They planned to carve my beating heart from my body while I lay wide awake, a silent, helpless prisoner within my own flesh. My marriage to William Royce dissolved into a toxic war zone long before this terrifying moment. We met during his 3rd year of surgical residency. I worked as a senior hospital administrator, captivated by his brilliance, his steady hands, and his relentless, burning ambition. I mistook his calculated, predatory intensity for romantic passion. Over 5 years, the polished facade crumbled into dust. William viewed people as biological mechanisms and convenient status symbols. My career advanced rapidly. My private medical consultancy firm secured a multi-million-dollar government contract. William's pride fractured under the weight of my success. His ambition curdled into a dark, suffocating, professional jealousy. He masked his deep-seated resentment with wild financial extravagance. William bought vintage European sports cars. He ordered bespoke Italian suits by the dozen. He purchased a sprawling, high-maintenance estate in the Hamptons. He hid the crushing reality of his financial recklessness behind a web of offshore accounts and complex shell companies. I uncovered the complete, devastating truth 6 months ago. The debts ran into the tens of millions. He owed money to violent syndicates who did not send standard collection letters. They sent brutal enforcers to our gated driveway. The final, irreparable fracture occurred when I filed for divorce. I ordered a ruthless forensic audit of our shared assets. I backed William into a corner with 0 escape routes. I threatened his pristine medical reputation, his opulent lifestyle, and his physical freedom. I held the evidence to put him in federal prison for fraud. William found a twisted, horrifying, and highly lucrative solution to his problems locked within my own biology. I possessed Rh null blood. The global medical community called the mutation golden blood. My blood lacked all antigens in the Rh system. The genetic anomaly made my blood the rarest type on the entire planet. I served as a universal donor for anyone with rare Rh blood types, but finding a match for my own medical needs proved nearly impossible. William developed a dangerous obsession with my medical file during our 1st year of marriage. He cataloged my vitals. He studied my lab results. He tracked my genetic markers with a feverish intensity bordering on madness. "The recipient in OR4?" Nurse Hennessy murmured. Her voice sounded closer now. I felt the slight displacement of air as she leaned over my immobilized body. The surgical chart lists him as John Doe, private pay, no insurance routing number, no national registry identification code. The patient is an international diplomat requiring absolute discretion. William snapped, shutting down her inquiry. His private security detail handles the logistics. Our sole job is the cardiac extraction. Swab the surgical site. A thick, freezing liquid slapped against my bare chest. The nurse scrubbed the iodine solution in wide, heavy concentric circles from my collarbone down to my upper abdomen. The physical sensation felt vivid, sharp, and undeniable. The rough texture of the sponge scraped against my skin. The stinging chill of the antiseptic seeped into my pores. The underground market. The realization hit my consciousness with the brute force of a physical blow. William bypassed the National Organ Registry entirely. He sold my heart on the black market to cover his massive syndicate debts. A wealthy, desperate buyer with a matching rare blood type needed an immediate transplant. William provided the perfect, untraceable donor. He served up his own wife, legally pronounced dead by his own absolute, unquestionable authority. "Prep the drapes," William ordered. Heavy, sterile blue sheets descended over my body. The fabric blocked out the biting chill of the operating room vent. The draping process left only a distinct rectangular square of exposed iodine-stained skin directly over my sternum. I lay entombed beneath the heavy fabric, prepped for the slaughter. I focused every ounce of my willpower on a single, desperate objective: move. I channeled every spark of electrical energy in my nervous system toward my extremities. Move a finger, twitch an eyelid, flare a nostril, shift a toe. The connection between my conscious brain and my skeletal muscles felt entirely severed. An impenetrable wall of chemical static replaced my neural pathways. I pictured my right index finger. I visualized the tendons contracting. I imagined the joint bending toward the palm. The muscles remained slack. The paralytic held my body in an unbreakable iron grip. A sudden, terrifying pressure compressed the mattress near my right ear. William leaned directly over the operating table. His face hovered inches from mine. I smelled the crisp, expensive scent of cedar, bergamot, and sterile latex, his signature combination. "You always thought you possessed a superior intellect, Peyton," William whispered. He pitched his voice low, ensuring the surgical staff across the room could not hear a single syllable. The venomous, triumphant words scraped directly against my eardrum. "You thought you held the power to freeze my accounts. You thought you held the evidence to ruin my life. But you are going to save my life today. $2 million, wired directly to a secure vault in Geneva the precise moment your rare heart begins beating in our VIP's chest. You are finally making a meaningful, substantial contribution to this marriage." A single tear formed beneath my right eyelid. The moisture represented a purely physiological response to the agonizing, terrifying effort of trying to force my paralyzed body to move. The tear pooled against my lower lash line, trapped by the heavy, unresponsive muscle of my eyelid. "Scalpel," William demanded. The sharp slap of heavy metal against tight latex filled the silence. He held the blade directly above my chest. The absolute edges of my chemical paralysis began to fray. The profound, suffocating numbness gripping my extremities developed tiny, agonizing pinpricks of sensation. The massive dose of anesthesia he administered at the house hours ago approached the end of its half-life. The complex drug cocktail began to fail. A fiery, blinding agony of returning nerve function swept up my arms and legs. My mind screamed at the burning sensation. My muscles remained locked, refusing to jerk away from the pain. William traced a slow, deliberate line down the exact center of my chest with the blunt, heavy end of the scalpel handle. He marked the precise incision site along my sternum, starting the primary midline incision. "Doctor, wait." Nurse Hennessy voice sliced through the heavy tension of the operating room. The junior tremor vanished. The tone rang out, sharp, loud, and deeply alarmed. "I gave you a direct, actionable order, nurse," William growled. The sharp edge of the scalpel hovered millimeters above my stained skin. "Look at the BIS monitor," she insisted. Her rubber-soled footsteps squeaked against the tile as she rushed toward the head of the surgical table. "The bispectral index is spiking rapidly." She just registered a 75. A 75 indicates full conscious awareness. She is not brain dead. She is awake. The monitoring equipment is malfunctioning, William countered smoothly. A microscopic tremor of raw panic entered his carefully controlled voice. Disconnect the frontal lead. The machine is delivering a false positive reading due to the extreme cold of the environment. I will not disconnect the lead, Nurse Hennessy shouted. Look at the primary cardiac monitor. Her heart rate just spiked to 140 beats per minute. A brain-dead patient lacking neurological function does not mount a massive tachycardic stress response to basic surgical prep. I am the chief attending surgeon, William roared. He abandoned the calm, authoritative facade completely. I declared this patient deceased. Step away from the surgical table immediately. No, she fired back, planting her feet firmly beside my head. I am calling a code blue. I am paging the chief of staff and hospital security. In that chaotic, terrifying, ear-splitting second, the chemical blockade in my nervous system suffered a microscopic, miraculous breach. The single tear pooling beneath my right eyelid pushed past the weakened barrier of the muscle. The hot, wet streak slipped down my cheek, cutting a clear track through the dried yellow iodine. Simultaneously, I funneled every remaining fragment of my returning strength into my right hand. The index finger twitched. The tiny movement propelled the digit downward. The fingernail tapped violently against the cold metal rim of the operating table. A sharp, audible clink cut through the shouting. Nurse Hennessy gasped, sucking in a massive breath of air. She moved! Her right finger just moved! She is crying! Oh my God, Dr. Royce, the patient is awake! It represents a basic spinal reflex, William lied. His voice sounded frantic, unhinged, and desperate. He lunged forward over my body. Give me the sternal saw! Hand it to me now. I will perform the extraction myself. Security! Nurse Hennessy screamed at the absolute top of her lungs. She bolted for the heavy operating room door. She slammed her open palm against the red emergency wall button. A piercing, cyclical alarm flooded the entire surgical suite. The blaring siren drowned out the rapid, frantic, rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. Security to OR 2, active assault in progress, surgeon attacking a live patient. The sterile, controlled tranquility of the operating room shattered into absolute, violent chaos. The scrub tech backed rapidly away from the table. Her hip struck the metal tray. Heavy retractors, bone saws, and scalpels crashed to the tiled floor in a deafening cacophony of ringing steel. William cursed violently, spewing vicious profanities. The heavy thud of his surgical boots echoed as he backed hastily away from the surgical table. He ripped his sterile blue gown off, throwing the fabric to the floor in a crumpled heap. You stupid, incompetent, meddling girl, he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at the nurse. You ruined everything! The heavy double doors of the OR crashed open, hitting the magnetic wall stops with a massive bang. Two large, broad-shouldered hospital security guards charged into the room. Dr. George Larrabee, the hospital's chief of medical ethics, followed closely behind them, his face pale and tight. Restrain Dr. Royce immediately, Larrabee barked. His eyes swept the chaotic scene. His gaze locked onto my exposed, iodine-stained chest and the clear, wet tear tracks marking my face. Get the crash cart in here now! Administer the reversal agent for rocuronium immediately. William bolted for the secondary exit leading to the adjoining scrub room. He slammed his shoulder hard into the heavy metal door. A third security guard stood firmly on the other side. The guard shoved the door inward, driving William back into the center of the OR. The two guards tackled my husband to the hard floor. A violent, brutal, physical struggle ensued. William grunted loudly, cursing and swinging his fists. Knuckles connected with flesh. A guard drove a knee into William's spine. The sharp, metallic snap of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists ended the fight. A new, frantic flurry of hands descended upon my body. A nurse wiped the stinging iodine from my chest with a warm, damp towel. Another staff member pushed a large syringe of Sugamadex directly into my central IV line. The powerful reversal agent flooded my veins, hunting down the paralytic molecules. The rapid transition from chemical paralysis to full physical mobility felt like stepping out of a freezing river directly into a blast furnace. The agonizing pins and needles erupted into a violent, uncontrollable, full-body shudder. My lungs expanded rapidly, pulling in massive quantities of air. I drew my first voluntary breath in 12 hours. The ragged, desperate gasp tore at my dry throat. My eyelids fluttered violently and snapped completely open. The blinding, brilliant glare of the overhead surgical lights seared my corneas. I squinted against the pain, turning my heavy head slowly to the side. William lay pinned to the floor tiles by the weight of two massive guards. His perfect, expensive haircut stuck to his forehead in sweaty clumps. His bespoke designer scrubs featured a massive tear down the shoulder. He looked directly up at me, his eyes stretched wide with the horrific realization of his total, inescapable destruction. The calculating medical genius vanished. The arrogant, untouchable surgeon disappeared. A pathetic, desperate, trapped criminal lay groveling on the floor in his place. I looked down at the man who tried to slaughter me for a payout. My vocal cords felt raw, burning, and raspy from the rigid intubation tube they prepped but never inserted. I forced the words up my throat. I demanded the ultimate satisfaction of ensuring my voice delivered the final blow. You missed the window, William. The local police arrived 5 minutes later. 4 uniformed officers dragged him out of the operating room in heavy steel handcuffs. The lead officer read William his Miranda rights loudly in front of the entire, stunned surgical staff crowding the hallway. The resulting fallout decimated the hospital's executive board. The massive federal investigation exposed a deep, complex labyrinth of administrative corruption. The FBI raided Williams' luxurious private office suite the following morning. Federal agents unearthed a hidden safe containing encrypted hard drives. The drives detailed the entire black market organ syndicate, complete with buyer names and offshore routing numbers. Forensic accountants traced the $2 million wire transfer from a numbered Swiss bank account directly to the anonymous VIP waiting in OR4. The mysterious buyer proved to be an exiled Eastern European oligarch actively wanted by Interpol for severe war crimes. A heavily armed FBI tactical team apprehended the oligarch and his private security detail on the hospital's private rooftop helipad as they attempted to board a flight out of the country. William Royce faced a massive federal indictment. The grand jury charged him with first-degree attempted murder, gross medical malpractice, wire fraud, and international trafficking in human organs. The subsequent trial became a massive, inescapable global media spectacle. The lead prosecutor played the crisp, clear audio recordings of the chaotic operating room to the packed courtroom. The hospital's automated security systems, triggered by Nurse Hennessy hitting the alarm, captured every whispered threat and frantic lie. The jury heard William's desperate, arrogant voice. They viewed the massive mountain of documentary evidence detailing his syndicate debts and his cold, calculated plot to slaughter his wife for a massive financial payout. The federal judge handed down a maximum merciless sentence. William received life in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Nurse Cora Hennessy became a national hero. The hospital board rapidly promoted her to head of surgical nursing to save their public image. I established a massive, permanent medical ethics scholarship in her name at her alma mater. I fully funded the $1 million endowment through the aggressive liquidation of William's remaining legal assets and the forced sale of the Hamptons estate. Reclaiming my life proved significantly harder than retaining it on the operating table. The severe psychological trauma of the freezing hospital room lingered in my mind. For 10 months, I slept with all the lights blazing in my new apartment. The low hum of a refrigerator or the sharp beep of a microwave triggered intense, paralyzing flashbacks. I spent hundreds of hours in intensive trauma therapy. I systematically dismantled the psychological horror of existing as a fully conscious prisoner trapped inside a supposedly dead body. I forced myself to learn how to trust medical professionals again. I rebuilt my foundational perception of personal safety from the ground up. I signed away my own death certificate in a polished mahogany conference room at my lawyer's office. The surreal legal procedure required me to formally reverse my own fatal declaration. The heavy black ink on the thick legal paper felt monumental. The document served as a permanent, undeniable record of the exact day my life was stolen and subsequently dragged back from the absolute precipice of darkness. The human heart exists as a fiercely resilient muscle. It pumps blood tirelessly. It sustains life through sheer mechanical force. It possesses a physical strength that defies simple comprehension. Yet, the heart remains terrifyingly, fatally vulnerable. Disease attacks it, injury damages it. Most horrifyingly, the heart falls victim to the cold, calculated malice of the individuals we invite into our lives and allow close enough to hold our survival in their hands. I survived the ultimate, devastating betrayal. I kept my heart beating inside my own chest. Every steady, rhythmic thump against my ribs serves as a constant, echoing reminder. I stand here alive, victorious, and breathing, while the man who tried to carve the life from my body rots in a concrete cage until his own treacherous heart finally stops beating. The end.
Modern Queen Tales presents The Harvest of Sienna McGrath. Chapter 1. The Breaking of a Villainess. The cold ash of my family's ledger burned down to grease and grey flakes in the centre of the iron hearth. I watched the last corner of the parchment curl, blacken, and dissolve into the chimney draught. That paper had held the names of 300 spies, the bank accounts of 5 corrupt dukes, and the blackmail material that had kept my family at the right hand of the Stellaris Empire for 4 generations. Now, it was carbon. 6 days ago, Crown Prince Philip had stood on the marble dais of the Grand Cathedral, his holy sword pointed directly at my collarbone. Beside him stood Joy, the newly discovered saintess, her white robes smelling of expensive myrrh and calculated innocence. Philip had read the decree of my banishment with a voice like brass trumpets. He called me a poisoner, a shadow weaver, and a blight upon the righteous expansion of the kingdom. He stripped me of my title, Sienna McGrath, and declared my family's estate confiscated by the crown. I remembered the exact weight of the iron collar they had locked around my neck to suppress my manner. I remembered the wet sound of the crowd spitting on my leather boots as the Imperial Guards escorted me to the southern gate. They expected me to weep, to curse, or to beg Philip for mercy. Instead, I had looked at his golden hair, noticed a small speck of dried beef stuck between his front teeth, and felt a sudden, profound wave of exhaustion. The carriage ride to the southern border took 5 days. The guards dumped me on a patch of scrubland at the foot of the jagged Wormtooth Mountains. They threw my single pine crate into the high weeds and drove the horses back toward the capital at a gallop, leaving a long red cloud of dust in their wake. The valley was silent. The wind came off the granite peaks, carrying the scent of damp pine needles and rotting granite. The noise of the imperial city, the clatter of iron-shod carriage wheels on cobblestones, the shouting of fishmongers, the constant, low hum of court gossip, existed only as a distant, fading headache. I walked over to the pine crate. Inside was a heavy iron hoe, 3 wool blankets, a sack of salt, a cast-iron pot, and 6 leather pouches of heirloom seeds, I had smuggled out of my private glasshouse in my petticoat. 10 yards away stood the cottage. The wooden roof had collapsed in the centre, allowing a young birch tree to grow straight through the middle of what must have been the parlour. The stone walls were thick, green, with lichen, and dry at the base. I dragged my crate through the doorway. The wooden floorboards had rotted into rich, black mould. A mouse scurried out from beneath a fallen rafter, its pink tail disappearing into a crack in the foundation. I took off my wool cloak, folded it twice, and laid it on the dry stone shelf near the hearth. My hands, once soft and scented with almond oil, were already smeared with grey charcoal and brown dirt. I picked up the heavy iron hoe. The dry ash handle was rough against my palms. I walked out into the overgrown yard, where the wild briars grew as thick as my wrist. My life, as the shadow of the throne, was finished. I raised the hoe and drove the iron blade deep into the tangled roots of the first wild rosebush. Chapter 2. The Sanctity of the Soil. By the 3rd month, the skin on my palms had hardened into thick, yellow calluses. My shoulders had broadened under my coarse linen shifts, and the constant, nagging ache in my lower back had settled into a steady, solid strength. The cottage was whole now. I had spent 3 weeks clearing the fallen rafters, cutting the birch tree down with a rusty bow saw I found in the lean-to, and splitting the pine logs to patch the roof. I stuffed the gaps between the hemlock beams with dried moss and clay from the creek bed. When the autumn rains fell, the water stayed outside, sliding off the fresh cedar shakes I had split by hand, with a frow and a mallet. My garden was an orderly grid of dark, raised beds. I had turned every square foot of the half-acre plot myself, driving the spade through the dense sod, lifting the heavy clods of clay, and shaking out the white grubs and witchgrass roots. I carried leaf mould from the forest floor in 2 large willow baskets, slung across my shoulders, mixing the rich, black leaf rot into the stubborn soil until it crumbled like dried breadcrumb. I knelt in the dirt, my knees sinking into the damp rye straw I used for mulch. The sun was hot on the back of my neck, warming the wool of my grey kirtle. I cleared a space in the straw and pressed my thumb into the soil, creating a shallow pocket. I dropped a fat, blue-speckled bean seed into the dark, moist earth, covered it with an inch of soil, and patted it firm. "Grow," I said. My voice sounded deep, raspy from weeks of only speaking to the crows that sat on my cedar fence posts. The work was simple. It possessed none of the double meanings of a diplomatic letter or the hidden poisons of a court banquet. If I failed to water the cabbages, they withered. If I dug the drainage ditch too shallow, the spring rains flooded the garlic. The earth was honest in its demands and immediate in its consequences. Every evening, I washed my feet in the cold water of the creek, watching the grey silt swirl away in the current. I cooked my dinner over a small fire of birch logs. A yellow turnip boiled with salt, a handful of dried parsnips, and a bowl of coarse barley porridge. The food was hot, filling, and tasted of nothing but itself. In the capital, they had called me a monster because I knew which herbs could stop a man's heart. Here, I used that same knowledge to identify the wild chicory that cleared the liver and the willow bark that eased the swelling in my joints after a long day of clearing stones. One afternoon, while I was staking the young pole beans, a massive black crow landed on the top rail of my garden fence. He had a scarred beak and a missing toe. "You're late," I told him, tying a hemp string around a green vine. "The grasshoppers have already eaten half the radish tops." The crow clicked his beak, flew down to the freshly turned earth, and pulled out a fat, white grub. He swallowed it with a single jerk of his neck, then looked up at me with a bright, black eye. I smiled. It was the first time my face had made that shape in 3 years. My skin felt tight, sunburned, and entirely my own. I did not owe this smile to a visiting ambassador, nor did I need to hide it behind a painted fan. I was a woman who grew beans in the mud, and that was more than enough. Chapter 3. The Shadow at the Gate. The frost had turned the pumpkin leaves to black slime by the time the iron horseshoes clattered against the stones of the mountain pass. I was standing near my woodpile, splitting birch logs with a 4-pound splitting maul. The air was cold enough to turn my breath into white plumes. The sound of the hooves was loud, rhythmic, and heavy, the unmistakable pace of imperial warhorses. I did not stop swinging. I lifted the maul over my head, let the weight of the iron drop, and split a thick log clean down the center with a sharp, satisfying crack. I stacked the 2 halves on the woodpile, picked up another round of birch, and set it on the chopping block. The horses stopped at my cedar fence gate. "Sienna," a voice called. It was a voice that had once filled my dreams and my nightmares. Philip's voice was high, clear, and trained by the best rhetoric tutors in the Empire. It carried the familiar cadence of command, though there was a strange, wet tremor at the edge of it now. I lifted the maul again and split another log. The white wood flew off to the side, landing in the dry leaves. "Sienna, please, turn around." I turned slowly, resting the head of the maul on the woodblock. Philip stood by the gate, holding the reins of his white stallion. He wore his ceremonial gold-plated breastplate, but it was covered in grey road dust and dried horse sweat. His red velvet cloak was torn at the hem, dragging in the dead briars by the roadside. His face, once smooth and carefully pale, was red from the mountain wind, his nose peeling, and dark, purple bruises sat heavy under his eyes. Behind him stood 4 imperial knights, their armor dull, their heads bowed. They did not look at me. They kept their eyes on the dirt road. "You have found a very quiet place," Philip said, his hands shaking as he tied his horse to my cedar post. The white stallion reared slightly, its hooves churning my carefully leveled road dirt into wet clay. I did not answer. I picked up a handful of split wood, stacked it under the eave of the cabin roof, and went back for more. "Sienna, I am speaking to you," Philip said. He opened the latch on the gate and stepped into my yard. His heavy steel-toed boots sank 3 inches into the wet earth of my turnip bed. "You are stepping on the winter turnips," I said. My voice was flat, dry, and lacked any of the polite modulation I had spent 15 years practicing. Philip stopped. He looked down at his boot, then looked up at me, his eyes wide, wet, and desperate. "The turnips? Sienna, I have ridden for 6 days without sleep. I have eaten nothing but hardtack and dried beef. The Empire is in ruins. Joy was a fraud. She was a spy from the Southern Caliphate. She poisoned my father's tea with slow arsenic. He is dead, Sienna. My father is dead." I picked up another log and set it on the block. "The soil in that bed is loose, because I double dug it last week. Your boots are compacting the earth. It will make the turnips woody." "Did you not hear me?" Philip's voice cracked. He took 3 quick steps forward, his golden armor clanking loudly in the quiet valley. He reached out a hand, his fingers clad in fine, white kidskin leather that was now stained with horse grease. "My father is dead. I am the king now, and I made a terrible mistake." I swung them all. The birch log split with a loud, violent bang. A splinter of white wood flew up and struck Philip's gold breastplate, leaving a tiny grey scratch on the polished surface. He jumped back, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "You should leave before the sun sets behind the ridge," I said, pointing the handle of the maul toward the western peaks. "The pass gets icy after dark. The horses will slip." "Sienna, I am begging you." Philip fell to his knees. The movement was sudden, heavy, and dramatic. His golden knee guards sank deep into the black mud of my compost path. He reached out and grabbed the hem of my coarse wool skirt, his white gloves instantly soaking through with dark, rotting leaf mold. I was blind. I was a fool. I let them poison my mind against the only woman who ever truly protected me. The court is a nest of vipers. I have no one I can trust. Please, Sienna, come back with me. I will restore your name. I will give you the Grand Duchy of the North. I will make you my queen. I looked down at his hands on my skirt. The wool was dirty, smelling of wood smoke and mutton tallow. His white gloves looked absurd against it. Let go of my skirt, Philip, I said. You are getting grease on the wool, and I only have one winter kirtle. Chapter 4. The Power of Total Indifference. The kitchen hearth was warm, the smell of roasted chicory root filling the small cabin. Through the small glass window pane, the only luxury I had purchased with my remaining silver coins, I could see Philip. He had not left. He was sitting on a flat stone near my well, his head in his hands. His knights had set up a small, miserable camp in the pine grove across the road, their campfires flickering, like yellow eyes, in the dark. I sat at my pine table, carving a new wooden spoon from a piece of dry applewood. The shaving horse held the wood tight, and my draw knife peeled off thin, curly ribbons of sweet-smelling timber. The door of the cabin did not have a lock, only a heavy oak latch. Philip did not knock. He pushed the door open, his shoulders hunched, his golden armor removed. He wore only his white linen tunic, which was grey at the collar and smelled of old sweat. "Sienna," he whispered. "The cabin is warm. The wind is coming from the north tonight," I said, not looking up from my carving. "The chimney draws better when the draught is cold." He walked over to the hearth, his boots clicking on the dry floorboards I had scrubbed with lye. He held his hands out to the flames, his skin shivering. "Joy is in the dungeon. I had her locked in the iron cage, the one you designed for the high treason prisoners. I thought it would make you happy to know that," she cried. "She screamed your name. She said you were the one who taught her how to mix the hemlock. But I didn't believe her. I know she was lying to save herself." I pulled the draw knife toward me, shaving a smooth, rounded curve into the back of the spoon bowl. The iron cage has a loose hinge on the left side. If she pushes against it with her shoulder, she can slide her hand through the gap. You should have the blacksmith weld a gusset over the pin. Philip turned around, his face white. You don't care?" "I designed that cage 5 years ago," I said. "It was a good design for its time, but it has flaws. Most things do." "Sienna." He ran across the room and threw himself at my feet, grabbing my knees. He was weeping now, real tears wetting the coarse grey fabric of my apron. "Look at me. Please, just look at me. Tell me you hate me. Tell me you want me to crawl from here to the capital on my knees. I will do it. I will execute every lord who voted for your banishment. I will burn the Grand Cathedral to the ground. Just say something. Give me some sign that you are still in there." I let the draw knife rest on the shaving horse. I looked down at his head. His blonde hair, once styled with scented pomade, was matted, full of dry pine needles and grey dust. He looked like a small, wet dog that had been kicked into a ditch. "The parsnips need to be dug before the ground freezes solid," I said. "If the soil turns to stone, the roots will snap when I try to pull them. I will lose 30% of the crop." "Why are you talking about parsnips?" Philip screamed, his voice cracking with a high, hysterical edge. He stood up, shaking his fists at the low cedar beams of the ceiling. "I am talking about the Empire. I am talking about our wedding. I am offering you the crown. I am offering you my life, my soul, my eternal devotion. And you are talking about roots in the dirt. The roots keep me alive through January," I said. "Your crown did not prevent the winter of 34 from starving 40,000 people in the eastern provinces. I remember writing the grain relief reports. You were at the summer palace, matching your horses to your carriage velvet." "I was young," he cried. "I didn't know. I knew," I said. "I was 18. I spent 3 weeks in the damp cellar of the tax office, calculating the bushels of barley we needed to ship to keep the peasants from eating their own seed grain. You told me my hands smelled of ink and old paper, and you refused to dance with me at the midsummer ball." Philip flinched, as if I had struck him with the wood-splitting maul. He fell back against the stone chimney, his breath coming in shallow gasps. I remember that. I was an arrogant boy. I am sorry, Sienna. I am so sorry. The water in the kettle is boiling," I said, rising from my bench. I picked up a clean rag, lifted the iron kettle off the crane, and poured the steaming water into a clay mug over a spoonful of dried blackberry leaves. Do you want some tea? It helps with the chest cough you've had since you arrived. He looked at the clay mug, then at my face. His eyes were wide with a sudden, terrible realization. You don't hate me. No, I said. You aren't planning a rebellion. You aren't gathering your spies. You aren't waiting for the right moment to poison my wine. The spies were paid with Magrath gold, I said, taking a sip of the bitter tea. The gold is in the Imperial Treasury now. I have 3 silver coins left in a woolen sock under my mattress. I cannot afford to run a rebellion on 3 silver coins. Then why? He whispered, his voice trembling. Why won't you come back? If you don't hate me, why won't you help me? Because the cabbage white butterflies are very bad this year, I said. I have to pick the green caterpillars off the leaves by hand, every morning at dawn. If I go to the capital, the caterpillars will eat the hearts out of the late crop, and I will have nothing to ferment for winter kraut. Philip stared at me. He looked at my brown, scarred hands. He looked at the wooden spoon I was carving. He looked at the basket of dried sage hanging from the rafters. He did not see the clever, terrifying Sienna Magrath, who had run the imperial court from the shadows. He saw a woman who lived in a small stone house with a leaky roof and a garden full of dirt. He let out a low, whimpering sound, like a beaten hound, and slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floorboards, his face hidden in his knees. Chapter 5. Harvesting a Sovereign Future. The morning sun was a cold, yellow disk, rising over the eastern ridge, turning the frost on my cabbages into glittering diamonds. I walked out into the garden with my large willow basket. The air was so crisp, it bit the inside of my nose with every breath. I knelt in the straw, picked up my heavy iron garden knife, and sliced the thick, green stem of a winter cabbage. The leaves were dense, tightly packed, and heavy with cold water. Philip was still there. He had spent the night sleeping on his horse blanket under the lean-to, refusing to use my guest cot because he said he did not deserve the comfort. He stood by the cedar fence now, watching me work. His fine white tunic was stiff, with dried mud and wood smoke. He looked 20 years older than the boy who had banished me. "Are you going to stay here forever?" he asked. His voice was quiet now, cleared of the dramatic theatre of the court. "Until the house falls down," I said, laying the heavy cabbage in my basket. "And then I will build another one. The kingdom will not survive the winter without you," he said. "The treasury is empty. The southern border lords are refusing to pay their taxes. The army is murmuring about a coup. The southern lords always refuse to pay taxes when the king is young," I said, moving to the next cabbage. "You must send the 2nd Regiment to the border, not to fight, but to help them rebuild the irrigation canals that broke during the spring floods. Once the crops are secured, they will pay. They are farmers, Philip. They only want to know their fields will have water next summer." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. How? How do you know that?" "I read the agricultural surveys of 21, I said. "They are in the 3rd basement of the Royal Archives, behind the old tapestries of the Dragon Wars. Nobody has touched them since my grandfather was the Chancellor." Philip reached into his tunic and pulled out a heavy gold signet ring, the seal of the sovereign. He held it out to me, on his palm. The gold caught the cold morning light, casting a yellow glare onto the white frost. "Take it," he said. "Take the kingdom. I don't want it. I never wanted it. I only wanted to be the hero who saved the land. But there is nothing to save. It's just endless paper, and angry lords, and people starving in the dark. You are the only one who can make it work." I did not look at the ring. I sliced another cabbage stem. The clean schlick of the blade, loud in the silent valley. "I have 54 cabbages left to harvest today," I said. "If I do not get them into the cellar before the hard freeze tonight, they will turn to mush. I cannot eat a gold ring, Philip. It does not keep the damp out of my bones. He let his hand drop. The signet ring slipped from his palm, falling into the dead weeds by his boots. He did not bother to pick it up. You really don't want me, he said. It was not a question. I want to finish my harvest, I said. He stood there for a long time, watching me move down the row of cabbages. The sun climbed higher, warming the air until the frost began to melt, turning into tiny drops of water that ran down the green leaves like sweat. Finally, I heard the leather reins creak as he unknotted them from my fence post. I heard his heavy boots squelch through the mud as he walked his horse back toward the mountain road. He did not call out to me again. He did not say goodbye. I did not look up. I reached down, cleared a handful of damp straw from the base of the next cabbage, and drove my knife through the thick, green wood of the stem. The sun was warm on my back now. A single red-tailed hawk circled high above the valley, its wings steady against the blue sky. The wind carried the clean, sharp smell of pine needles and wet earth. I laid the cabbage in my basket, picked up the heavy load, and walked toward the root cellar, my boots leaving deep, solid tracks in the dark, fertile mud of my own land. The end.
Modern Queen Tales presents The Shadow Architects. The jury foreman handed the verdict slip to the bailiff. The crisp white paper passed through the trembling hands of the court clerk before landing on Judge Thorndyke's mahogany desk. The courtroom air felt heavy, saturated with the recycled breath of 50 reporters and the suffocating tension of a billion-dollar corporate fraud trial. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a low, steady note against the silence. On the count of systemic market manipulation, Judge Thorndyke read, his voice amplifying through the brass microphone, we find the defendant, Wagner Holdings, guilty. On the count of criminal conspiracy to defraud federal regulators, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of massive-scale wire fraud, guilty. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The prosecution table erupted. My junior associates, Warren and Camille, slammed their hands onto the oak surface, cheering a victory that took 3 years of relentless litigation, sleepless nights, and the parsing of 10 million encrypted emails. The court sketch artist frantically shaded the scene. The reporters in the back row scrambled for the heavy wooden double doors to file their breaking alerts. I stood perfectly still. I watched the CEO of Wagner Holdings, Malcolm Brana. He sat across the aisle at the defense table. He straightened his tailored Italian suit jacket. He checked his platinum Patek Philippe watch. He smiled. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. A man facing complete corporate dissolution and decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary does not smile at his watch. He does not check the time as his legacy burns. He checks the time because he is waiting for a schedule to execute. I packed my leather briefcase. I slid my legal pads, my red ink pens, and the sealed manila folders into the compartments. I locked the brass latches with a sharp, decisive click. The marble floors of the federal courthouse echoed with the stampede of journalists rushing for the exit. I walked out into the humid late afternoon air of downtown Manhattan. The exhaust from idling news vans choked the street. I pulled my phone from my trench coat pocket to call my sister Shannon. We planned to celebrate at the steakhouse on 54th Street. The screen displayed a solid red, no services indicator. I tapped the glass. I toggled the cellular data switch in the settings menu. The indicator remained red. I forced a hard reboot of the device. The Apple logo appeared, faded, and the red slash returned to the corner of the screen. A block away, I spotted a bright yellow taxi. I raised my hand. The cab screeched to a halt at the curb, throwing a spray of stagnant puddle water onto the sidewalk. I slid into the cracked vinyl back seat. The smell of stale coffee and industrial air freshener filled the confined space. JFK Airport, please, I said. My gut instinct overrode my dinner plans. Brana's smile dictated a rapid change of location. The driver tapped the acrylic partition. He pointed a stubby finger at the glowing meter. Credit card reader is down. System update or something. Cash only. I opened my wallet. I pulled out my Bank of America debit card. I stepped out of the cab and walked to the ATM built into the brick wall of the corner bodega. The machine hummed under a flickering neon beer sign. I slid the card into the slot. I typed my 4-digit PIN. The screen flashed a brilliant, blinding blue. A loud, mechanical, grinding noise echoed from the internal card reader mechanism. The machine seized my card. The screen displayed a single word in stark, black, block letters: confiscated. My phone vibrated violently against my palm. A single emergency alert bypassed the dead cellular network. The message forced its way through a backdoor broadcast channel utilized exclusively by the Department of Homeland Security for imminent national disasters. I stared at the harsh white text on the screen. Federal warrant issued. Rachel Aniston charges. Espionage, treason, cyber terrorism. Do not approach. Highly dangerous. I looked up. The giant LED billboard flashing the daily stock ticker above Times Square flickered. The green numbers charting the Dow Jones Industrial Average vanished. A high-resolution photograph of my face filled the 100-foot screen. The image came from my Federal Bar Association ID card. The same charges scrolled in brutal red letters beneath my chin. Pedestrians on the sidewalk stopped. They looked at the screen. A woman standing 10 feet away, holding a shopping bag, looked from the glowing billboard directly to my face. Her eyes widened. I shoved my hands into the deep pockets of my trench coat. My fingers curled around the cold metal casing of the encrypted flash drive I secured from the Wagner servers during the initial phases of legal discovery. The drive contained the raw, unredacted audit files Judge Thorndike deemed inadmissible for the trial on the grounds of national security relevance. The coordinated speed of this attack revealed the absolute truth. I possessed the evidence of a systemic legal breach. The state-sponsored retaliation sought to erase me before I could analyze the raw data. I turned down a narrow, trash-lined alleyway between two towering glass office buildings. I walked fast, my heels clicking against the damp pavement. I pulled the battery from my dead phone. I snapped the SIM card in half. I tossed the dismantled pieces into a rusted industrial dumpster overflowing with cardboard boxes. I became a ghost in the city I just conquered. The basement of the abandoned Brooklyn shipyard smelled of salt, motor oil, and decaying concrete. I sat on a broken wooden crate in the center of the cavernous, windowless space. I opened my air-gap-filled laptop. I purchased the heavy-duty Panasonic Toughbook 3 years ago for exactly this type of localized off-grid analysis. I plugged the Wagner flash drive into the primary USB port. The screen cast a pale blue glow over the damp, cinder-block walls. I traced the breadcrumbs from the routine corporate audit of Wagner Holdings. The financial ledgers showed massive, sustained capital bleed. Trillions of dollars vanished from Wagner's liquid asset pools into a labyrinth of shell companies registered in non-extradition territories. The money flowed through Cayman Island trusts, Swiss-numbered accounts, and dummy corporations based in the Seychelles. I bypassed the standard corporate encryption layers. I deployed the brute force decryption keys I wrote during my early years analyzing cybercrime at the Department of Justice. The progress bar crept across the screen. The terminal window cascaded with thousands of lines of green code as the script fractured the encryption algorithms. The file structures unraveled. I bypassed the standard human resources and accounting data. I entered a deeply buried subdirectory labeled Jupiter. I opened the folder. The screen populated with hundreds of PDF documents marked with classified federal headers. The red stamps read, Top, Secret, CI, No Foreign. I clicked on a master index file dated June 2026. The intelligence memos laid out the absolute truth of global governance. The documents identified the specific players operating a shadow network far above the reach of standard federal oversight or democratic elections. I read the names: the Director of National Intelligence, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the CEO of the largest global defense contractor in North America, the head of the Central Banking Reserve, the Senate Majority Leader. They called themselves the Jupiter Board. The memos detailed their exact hierarchy. Elias Vaughn, the central banking head, operated as the chairman. The intelligence director managed logistics and enforcement. The Chief Justice provided the legal shielding. They operated entirely outside the democratic process. They dictated global policy through absolute, localized judicial manipulation. When a multinational oil corporation needed favorable drilling legislation, Jupiter provided the pre-drafted laws to compromise senators and guaranteed a smooth passage. When a whistleblowing journalist got too close to their black budget funding routes, Jupiter deployed federal tactical agents to silence them. They engineered reality from boardrooms immune to congressional subpoenas. The June 2026 memo explicitly outlined the purpose of the Wagner Holdings trial. Wagner served as the primary money laundering apparatus for the Jupiter Board. The corporation filtered the stolen trillions and converted the capital into untraceable cryptocurrency and offshore real estate holdings. My legal victory threatened to expose the financial artery of the entire clandestine organization. Malcolm Brana smiled in the courtroom because he knew the verdict held zero power. The shadow government already initiated the protocol to burn my life to the ground. He knew I would be a hunted fugitive before the ink dried on the sentencing paperwork. I scrolled through the geopolitical directives. The scope of their operation paralyzed my breathing. The board orchestrated the recent European energy crisis to force continental dependence on Jupiter-owned natural gas conglomerates. They engineered the localized border conflicts in South America to justify massive defense spending contracts awarded directly to their own subsidiaries. They owned the judges. They owned the courts. They owned the legislative narrative. I disconnected the flash drive. The blue light of the screen illuminated my shaking hands. The legal system I dedicated my life to defending existed solely as a fabricated stage play. The true power operated in the digital dark, writing the script and moving the pieces. I needed to understand the exact mechanics of their attack on my life. I required a roadmap of their digital assault. I accessed the shipyard's unsecured Wi-Fi network through a series of 12 bouncing Tor relays. I routed my connection through servers in Iceland, Romania, and Brazil before touching the domestic internet. I initiated a deep forensic scan of my own law firm's server logs, pulling the archived data from the encrypted cloud backups I secured weeks ago as a failsafe. The forensic evidence painted a picture of absolute surgical precision. The server logs showed the intrusion originated from a cluster of private, untraceable servers operating outside standard IP registries. These private servers established a backdoor connection directly into the federal legal databases and my firm's internal network simultaneously. I watched the timeline of the digital injection. At precisely the moment the jury read the guilty verdict, the private servers executed an automated script. The script injected perfectly forged wire transfer documents into my personal case files. I opened the PDFs. The forged documents showed offshore deposits of $10 million, complete with my exact cryptographic signature. The ledgers documented the routing of the money from a known, heavily sanctioned terrorist organization directly into my personal checking account. They planted classified military drone schematics on the hard drive of my home computer. They fabricated a digital trail of treason so dense and impenetrable that no defense attorney on earth could ever unravel it in a courtroom. They built a cage of data around my life in less than 3 seconds. The attack extended far beyond digital forgery. I opened a global news aggregator site. The psychological warfare tactics dominated the front pages of every major media outlet. The top story featured an exclusive interview with my law partner, Warren. Warren sat in a sterile television studio, sweating slightly under the bright overhead lights. He wore his navy blue courtroom suit. "Rachel suffered under the immense pressure of the Wagner case," Warren said to the camera. His eyes tracked slightly to the left, reading directly from a teleprompter located just off screen. "We noticed a severe decline in her mental stability over the last 6 months. She expressed deeply paranoid delusions about government conspiracies and shadow organizations tracking her movements. She needs immediate psychiatric help. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities." I closed the tab. My stomach twisted. I opened another network feed. I watched my sister Shannon appear on a different broadcast. She sat in her living room. She wore dark sunglasses, hiding her eyes. She read a prepared statement detailing my history of erratic behavior, sudden outbursts, and emotional instability. The absolute terror in her voice translated perfectly through the audio feed. They threatened her. They held her medical license hostage. They likely threatened her family, forcing her to manufacture a narrative of my mental collapse on national television. The media branded me a manic, unstable rogue agent. The talking heads debated my psychological profile. They alienated my allies in a matter of hours. They framed the narrative so perfectly that any truth I spoke would sound like the rambling of a lunatic. I recorded a quick 10-second video on my laptop webcam. I held up the printed June 2026 memo directly to the lens. The Wagner verdict was a trigger. I said to the camera, "I am Rachel Aniston. The charges against me are fabricated. The Jupiter board engineered this frame job to protect their money laundering network." I uploaded the video to 5 major social media platforms simultaneously. I hit the refresh key. The algorithmic suppression operated with terrifying mechanical speed. The platform scrubbed the video in exactly 2.4 seconds. The automated moderation tools flagged my facial geometry, my voice print, and the specific keywords I used. My accounts vanished completely. The screens displayed blank "user not found" errors. My defense died in the digital void before a single human eye could perceive it. I existed in total isolation, surrounded by an invisible, impenetrable wall of algorithmic censorship. They controlled the information flow with absolute authority. The raw data on my flash drive represented only a fraction of the Jupiter network's true scope. The June 2026 memo referenced a central repository, a physical data center located in an underground colocation facility in Ashburn, Virginia. This facility housed the master servers. The master servers contained the unencrypted ledgers. They held the blackmail files on every compromised politician in the hemisphere. They stored the direct, unredacted communications of the Jupiter board ordering assassinations and economic sabotage. I reviewed the server maintenance schedule buried deep in the Wagner HR files. State actors initiated a remote wipe command the exact moment I fled the Manhattan courthouse. The massive data deletion process required 72 hours to overwrite the physical hard drives completely using a secure multi-pass wipe protocol. I checked my watch. I had 12 hours left before the shadow government erased their footprints forever. I abandoned the shipyard. I walked 10 blocks to a cash-only auto yard. I purchased a used, matte black Yamaha motorcycle with the emergency funds hidden inside the silk lining of my briefcase. I strapped my laptop bag to the rear seat. I rode south through the night. The rain lashed against my helmet visor, blurring the highway lights into streaks of neon. I pushed the engine to its limit, tearing down Interstate 95. I arrived at the Ashburn facility just before dawn. The building masqueraded as a generic agricultural supply warehouse. The faded sign read, "Mid-Atlantic Grain and Feed." The perimeter told a different story. It featured high-voltage chain-link fencing, sweeping thermal imaging cameras, and reinforced steel crash barriers. I bypassed the exterior security, using a blind spot outlined in the facility's architectural blueprints. I recovered those blueprints 3 years ago during a localized fraud case involving the warehouse's original construction firm. Knowledge is the ultimate weapon, and I kept everything. I parked the motorcycle behind a cluster of thick pine trees. I sprinted across the wet grass, timing my movements with the sweeping rotation of the thermal cameras. I reached the eastern wall. I pulled my lock-picking kit from my pocket. I picked the mechanical master lock on the heavy industrial ventilation grate in under 30 seconds. The metal groaned as I swung it open. I crawled through the galvanized steel ductwork. The hum of massive industrial cooling fans vibrated violently against my chest. The air smelled of ozone and filtered dust. I navigated the labyrinth of metal shafts until I reached the primary server room. I kicked the access panel loose. I dropped quietly onto the raised anti-static floor tiles. The room glowed with thousands of blinking green LEDs. The cold, climate-controlled air bit at my exposed skin. 3 men in matte black tactical gear stood near the central server rack. They wore no military insignia. They carried suppressed submachine guns strapped to their chests. They wore night vision optics pushed up on their helmets. State-sponsored cleanup crews. I moved silently through the deep shadows of the towering server racks. I controlled my breathing. I reached the primary central console. The progress bar on the massive monitor showed the multi-pass wipe sequence at 94%. I enacted my pivot. The courtroom represented a dead end. I could never clear my name in a rigged, corrupted legal system. Any trial would be presided over by a Jupiter judge. Any jury would be fed Jupiter-curated evidence. I needed to execute a full-scale, undeniable public exposure of the shadow government. I needed to hand the raw data directly to the public. I pulled a specialized hard drive extraction tool from my bag. The heavy steel claw was designed to rip secure drives from their housings without initiating the fail-deadly self-destruct protocols. I waited for the tactical team to patrol the far end of the long aisle. The heavy thud of their combat boots echoed off the concrete walls. I stepped out from the shadows. I slammed the extraction tool into the primary Jupiter server rack. The metal teeth locked onto the master physical drive. I braced my boots against the rack and ripped the heavy brick-like drive from its secure housing. The alarms blared instantly. Blinding red strobe lights flooded the room, painting the servers in harsh, rhythmic flashes of crimson. "Contact!" one of the guards shouted. I ran. I tucked the master drive under my arm like a football and sprinted toward the reinforced emergency exit doors. Suppressed gunfire coughed rapidly behind me. Bullets shattered the server racks inches from my head, sending spectacular showers of yellow sparks and pulverized silicon into the air. The smell of burning plastic filled my lungs. I hit the crash bar on the heavy steel doors with my shoulder. I burst into the humid, gray, morning air. I vaulted onto the Yamaha motorcycle. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted the throttle. The rear tire spun in the wet mud before catching traction. I launched the bike down the access road, leaving the facility behind as 3 black, unarmored SUVs swarmed the front entrance, their tires screeching on the asphalt. I rode for 3 hours, taking secondary farm roads to avoid the interstate traffic cameras. I secured a cash-only motel room off a deserted stretch of Route 301. The room smelled of old cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. I threw the deadbolt on the heavy wooden door. I connected the master drive to my laptop using a high-speed data transfer cable. I initiated the bypass protocols. The drive mounted to my desktop. It contained the ultimate prize, the silencer protocols. I read the highly classified documents. The text outlined the exact methodologies the network used to silence high-ranking government officials who refused to comply with Jupiter directives. The files detailed the staged suicide of a dissenting state senator last year, including the exact brand of rope used and the forged handwriting analysis of the suicide note. They outlined the specific, untraceable chemical agents used to induce a fatal heart attack in a vocal federal judge who threatened to audit the defense budget. The protocols represented a mechanized, industrialized system of murder and character assassination. It was fully documented, fully budgeted, and authorized by the Jupiter Board Chairman Elias Vaughn. I prepared for the final, irreversible disclosure. I rented terabytes of server space on a decentralized network of pirate nodes scattered across Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and South America. I established a dead man's switch using a complex blockchain smart contract. If I failed to input a specific cryptographic key every 24 hours, the system would automatically duplicate and broadcast the master files to every major news outlet, intelligence agency, whistleblower portal, and independent investigative journalist on the planet. I organized the definitive proof into easily digestible, indexed folders. I linked the Jupiter Group directly to the engineered water crisis in the Mediterranean. I uploaded the pristine financial ledgers showing billions of dollars flowing from the manufactured drought directly into the private Cayman accounts of Chairman Vaughn. I attached the crystal-clear audio recordings of the board, casually ordering the assassination of 3 international trade regulators who opposed their natural gas monopoly. The evidence presented a flawless, undeniable, mathematically perfect narrative of global subjugation. I activated the laptop webcam. I stared directly into the glass lens. The recording light glowed a steady, bright red in the dim motel room. "My name is Rachel Aniston," I said. My voice remained perfectly steady, ringing with absolute clarity in the quiet room. 3 days ago, the federal government branded me a fugitive. They froze my assets. They manufactured forensic evidence to destroy my life. They coerced my family into participating in a global smear campaign. They did this because I uncovered the Jupiter board. I held the heavy physical hard drive up to the camera. The barcode and federal asset tags faced the lens. This drive contains the complete, unredacted operational history of the shadow government currently dictating our global policy. The evidence proves their direct involvement in the manufacturing of the European energy crisis, the South American border wars, and the systemic corruption of the federal judicial system. They operate entirely above the law. They use our democratic institutions as weapons against the populace. I leaned closer to the camera. I locked my eyes on the lens. I am releasing all classified files, financial ledgers, video evidence, and internal communications to the public domain right now. The torrent link is embedded in this broadcast. This is a call to immediate action. Download these files, mirror them on your local hard drives, distribute them across peer-to-peer networks. Do not trust the mainstream platforms. They will scrub this data within seconds using algorithmic suppression. Rely on decentralized verification. Analyze the unredacted documents for yourselves. The truth belongs to you now. Ensure they cannot erase it. I brought up the final, most terrifying document on my screen. I presented the detailed engineering schematics for Project Oberon. I leave you with a final warning, I said, my tone hardening. Next month, the Jupiter board plans to roll out Project Oberon. It is an evolving biometric surveillance grid disguised as a global public health initiative. It will monitor your heart rate, your physical location, your financial transactions, and your complete digital footprint in real time, utilizing existing cellular network towers. They will deploy this technology to identify and silence future whistleblowers before they can ever speak. You have the blueprints now. You have the names and home addresses of the men building it. Stop them. I clicked the upload button. The transfer progress bar filled the center of my screen. The data packets fragmented, heavily encrypting and routing through thousands of decentralized nodes simultaneously. The transfer hit 100%. The files cascaded across the globe, replicating infinitely faster than any centralized algorithm could flag or suppress them. The notification sounds chimed rapidly on my laptop. Independent journalists in Berlin downloaded the files. Hacktivist collectives in Tokyo mirrored the data onto dark web servers. The download count skyrocketed into the millions within 4 minutes. My phone screen lit up with breaking news alerts from independent media outlets broadcasting the raw data. I closed the laptop. I packed the computer and the master drive into my bag. I unlocked the deadbolt. I walked out of the motel room and stepped into the warm, bright morning sunlight. The shadow government operated exclusively in the dark, relying on silence, isolation, and absolute fear to maintain their empire. I stripped away the dark. I handed the fire directly to the world. I pulled my helmet over my head, started the heavy motorcycle engine, and rode toward the horizon. The end. Modern Queen Tales presents The Ghost Rider's Revenge. Part 1. The Architect of the Illusion. The heavy oak door of the conference room sealed shut with a soft, final click. I stared at the Mont Blanc pen resting on the mahogany table. The silver barrel gleamed under the recessed lighting. The ink inside the cartridge held the power to erase my existence. Across the polished wood, Byron Rolls smiled. His teeth flashed, perfectly veneered, white and predatory. "Sign the paper, Sabrina," Byron said. His voice carried a manufactured rasp. His vocal coach charged $2,000 an hour to perfect that specific, gravelly inflection. I picked up the pen. The metal felt cold against my skin. The contract in front of me outlined the sale of my soul. 50 pages of dense, 10-point legal jargon sat in a neat stack. Sapphire Records offered me $2 million. The single, unyielding condition demanded absolute silence. I relinquished all writing credits, all publishing rights, and all public acknowledgement for the 12 tracks comprising the album Aurora Visage. Byron Rolls would take sole, undisputed credit as the lone visionary. I pressed the nib to the signature line. The black ink stained the thick, cream-colored parchment. The friction of the pen scratching across the paper sounded deafening in the quiet room. I completed the final loop of my name. The 3 Sapphire Records executives sitting adjacent to Byron exhaled simultaneously. They slid the $2 million cashier's check across the table. I picked up the rectangular slip of paper. I became a ghost. My mother's hospital bills sat in a shoebox under my bed back in Riverside. The crushing weight of her medical debt dictated my hand. The $2 million cleared the liens on our foreclosed home and paid the oncologists. The money bought her comfort during her final months. I traded my identity for her peace. For 5 years, I lived inside the mental prison erected by that signature. The trauma of the erasure began 3 months after the signing. On a Tuesday morning in late October, I stood in the checkout line at a crowded grocery store in Silver Lake. The overhead speakers crackled. The crisp, familiar opening chords of House of Embers drifted through the fluorescent-lit aisles. That song held my bleeding heart. I wrote the melody on the floor of my childhood bedroom. The bank foreclosed on the house 3 days prior to that writing session. Every lyric detailed the brutal physical sensation of watching my family's legacy dismantled by faceless creditors. I poured my raw grief into the bridge, documenting the sharp smell of brown packing tape and the hollow, terrifying echo of my footsteps in the emptied rooms. Byron sang the lyrics with the emotional depth of a plastic mannequin. The producers at Sapphire layered his thin voice with heavy digital reverb. They compressed my intricate acoustic guitar picking into a slick, radio-friendly pop ballad designed for mass consumption. The grocery store cashier hummed along to the chorus. I dropped my basket of apples and walked out the sliding glass doors into the blinding Los Angeles sun. He stood on the Grammy stage that following February, clutching a golden gramophone trophy. I sat on a thrifted plaid sofa in my studio apartment in North Hollywood. The television screen illuminated the dark room. The camera zoomed in on his face. He smoothed the lapels of his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. I wrote this album in a dark place, Byron said into the microphone. He dedicated the song to his difficult, isolating upbringing in the suburbs. He grew up in a gated community in Calabasas with a massive trust fund and a private chef. He spent his teenage years driving a Range Rover to private tennis lessons. Watching him perform, my pain hollowed my bones. The anger festered in my chest. A physical, leaden weight sat behind my ribs. I avoided the radio. I canceled all my streaming subscriptions. I stopped frequenting the local coffee shops that played top 40 hits. The music industry celebrated Byron as a generational poet. Magazines crowned him a solitary genius speaking for the broken-hearted. I sat in my apartment, watching my bank account drain, trapped by the iron bars of an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. The calendar on my phone glowed in the dark. The 12th of October, 2026. The 5-year term of the NDA expired at exactly midnight. I sat at my desk. The digital clock illuminated the room with red numbers. 11:58 p.m. 11:59 p.m. 12 a.m. The silence ended. Part 2. The Paper Trail of a Fraud. I pulled my encrypted solid-state drive from the fireproof safe hidden under my bed. The brushed metal casing felt heavy and significant in my palms. I plugged the drive into the USB-C port of my MacBook Pro. The screen woke up, casting a cool blue light across my face in the darkened room. I opened the master folder labeled Project Genesis. The complete paper trail of a massive, multi-million-dollar fraud sat waiting in perfectly organized subdirectories. Byron's entire, carefully crafted genius persona rested squarely on my lyrical fingerprints. Critics wrote glowing think pieces praising his use of gritty, working-class metaphors. They lauded the opening verse of the platinum single Rust and Ruin. The narrator in that song describes the exact metallic, suffocating taste of siphoning gas from a rusted Chevrolet on a freezing morning. Byron Rolls drove a matte black Porsche 911. He paid an assistant to pump his premium unleaded fuel. I grew up with a broken-down 1998 Chevy Malibu sinking into the cracked concrete of our driveway. I wrote that specific line after swallowing a mouthful of unleaded gasoline. I needed to get the engine turned over for my double shift at a local diner. The lyrics chronicled the grease under my fingernails and the smell of old fry oil in my hair. The words belonged to the bruised knuckles of my past. I double-clicked on the subfolder containing the original, raw voice memos. The digital timestamps glowed in stark white text against the dark mode background of my file explorer. Embers Acoustic Draft 1.wave. Date created August 14th, 2020. File size 14.2 megabytes. Byron's official studio sessions for the album commenced in November of that same year. I possess the official studio booking logs from Sound City. I kept the desperate emails from his A&R representative, Clarence Rolls. Clarence operated as Byron's uncle and the primary fixer for Sapphire Records. I opened my archived email client. The messages from Clarence sat in a flagged folder. Date: the 2nd of September 2020. Subject: urgent. Byron needs material. Sabrina. Byron has writer's block. The label needs a soul-crushing ballad by Friday. The deadline is absolute. Send whatever you have. We are prepared to double your advance for the right track. I hoarded the raw data. The hard drive contained proof that every single melody, every complex chord progression, and every gut-wrenching lyric existed on my hard drive 3 full months before Byron ever stepped up to a studio microphone. I possessed the MIDI files, the scratch vocal takes, and the frantic late-night text messages from the production team begging for bridge revisions. I opened a new browser window. I pulled up a high-resolution photograph from the 2022 Songwriter of the Year banquet. Byron stood at the crystal podium, wearing a custom velvet tuxedo. He gripped the heavy glass trophy in both hands. The caption beneath the photo on his official Instagram page read, "Byron Rolls breaks down the agonizing, entirely solitary process of writing Aurora Visage." #Lone Wolf, #songwriting. The trophy represented a monument to systematic, corporate-backed creative theft. The entire music industry bowed to a phantom. The executives at Sapphire constructed a modern myth using my sweat and my heartbreak as the foundation. I prepared the explosives to dynamite the entire structure of his career. I organized the files into a single, compressed archive folder. I named the zip file The Architect. Part 3. The Midnight Leak Campaign. I opened a secure, encrypted browser routed through a virtual private network based in Switzerland. I navigated directly to a decentralized, blockchain-based file-sharing network. Sapphire Records employed a massive, relentless legal team. Those lawyers scrubbed traditional platforms like YouTube and SoundCloud clean of copyright infringements within minutes of an upload using automated bots. The decentralized nodes of this specific blockchain network made takedowns mathematically impossible. Once the audio files hit the distributed ledger, they lived there permanently. 10,000 anonymous servers globally replicated the data. I selected the raw, unmastered demo file of House of Embers. I added the zip archive containing the emails, the timestamps, and the original lyric sheets written on Riverside High School notebook paper. My index finger hovered over the trackpad. I pressed the upload button. The progress bar filled the center of my screen with a solid, bright green line. The system flashed a confirmation message, "Upload complete, files secured." I clicked the prompt to generate an anonymous, untraceable sharing link. I opened a burner account on X, formerly Twitter. I created the account 10 minutes prior using a masked IP address. I posted the generated link directly to the largest pop culture gossip forum on the platform. I tagged the major music journalists from Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, and Billboard. I typed a simple, direct caption, "The real voice behind Aurora Visage." Check the original file metadata timestamps. The lone wolf is a corporate puppet. I sat back in my desk chair. I watched the engagement metrics. For 10 agonizing minutes, the screen remained static. The view count hovered at 0. The blue glow of the monitor reflected in the window pane. Then, a prominent music theory user with 10,000 followers retweeted the link. The user added an exclamation point and a siren emoji. The view count jumped from 5 to 50. 50 became 500 in the next 60 seconds. 500 skyrocketed to 10,000 within 3 minutes. The jarring contrast between the two versions hit the internet like a physical, destructive shockwave. Users immediately began posting side-by-side audio clips. I refreshed my feed. A popular music producer uploaded a visual waveform comparison. On the left side of their screens, Byron's auto-tuned, overproduced mimicry played. The visualizer showed perfectly flat, mathematically corrected sound waves. The producers had used heavy pitch correction and artificial vibrato to mask his limited vocal range. On the right side, my original, raw demo played. The visualizer spiked and jagged, with human emotion. My voice on the demo recording cracked on the high, sustained notes of the bridge. The sharp, rhythmic sound of my calloused fingers sliding against the cheap steel strings of my acoustic guitar, anchored the tempo. The raw, desperate sorrow in my vocal delivery exposed the absolute, undeniable emptiness of Byron's platinum-selling rendition. The internet heard the soul he failed to replicate. The comments flooded my screen in a rapid, continuous scroll. Who is this girl? Her version just made me sob in my car. Wait, the immutable metadata on this file says August 2020. Byron recorded his vocals in November 2021. He copied her exact vocal inflections and breath patterns. He sounds like an AI generation of a human. Look at these emails from his A&R guy. They literally bought her trauma. The Generational Geniuses is a complete, manufactured fraud. The hashtag number Byron Rolls Exposed hit the #1 spot on the trending column at exactly 2 a.m. By 3 a.m., a new hashtag Who is Sabrina, overtook it. Dedicated internet sleuths extracted my name from the buried copyright registry of my early independent EP releases. They matched the acoustic guitar style. They ran vocal matching software. They verified my tone, my vibrato, and my unique phrasing. A prominent YouTuber named Audio Justice started a live stream. I clicked the link. The streamer sat in a neon-lit studio, wearing heavy headphones. He played my demo version of Rust and Ruin for his 40,000 live viewers. He paused the track after the first chorus. He took off his headphones and stared directly into the camera. Byron Rolls stole this woman's entire identity, the streamer said. He wore her poverty like a costume. The proof is right here in the blockchain ledger. The genius persona began to crack, splinter, and completely shatter across the digital landscape in real time. The notification badge on my email icon displayed a rapidly climbing number. Reporters sought comments. Fans demanded more music. The ghost materialized. Part 4. Dismantling the Platinum Legacy. The sun rose over the Los Angeles skyline, casting a hazy orange glow through my apartment window. The digital shockwaves triggered a catastrophic, immediate collapse within the music industry. My phone buzzed continuously on the nightstand. I picked it up. Marcus Geller, a highly respected session producer who worked on Byron's sophomore album, sent me a direct message on Instagram. Marcus wrote, "I saw the leak. You gave me the courage to stop hiding. I'm dropping my session demos today, too." He stole my bass lines on Midnight Drive and claimed he played the instruments himself in all the press tours. 10 minutes later, Olga Lebedeva, a prominent top-line melody writer, posted a 3-minute video on TikTok. She sat in her living room, holding up her own expiring Sapphire Records non-disclosure agreement. She held the document close to the camera lens. The Sapphire logo sat clearly at the top of the page. She pressed play on her laptop. A voice memo filled the audio track of the video. The recording featured Olga singing the exact vocal melody of Byron's biggest stadium club anthem. Byron claimed this melody came to him in a vivid dream while vacationing in Lake Como, Olga said to the camera. "I wrote this in a basement studio in Brooklyn while eating instant ramen. We are taking our music back." The silent collaborators mobilized rapidly. The dam broke, releasing a flood of undeniable evidence. The public realized Byron Rolls operated as a corporate sponge. He absorbed the blood, sweat, and desperate creativity of struggling, working-class musicians. He packaged our trauma behind a handsome face and a massive marketing budget. The financial impact struck Sapphire Records immediately. A mass streaming boycott organized itself organically across every major social media platform. Enraged fans created automated scripts and distributed them via Reddit. These scripts allowed users to permanently block Byron's artist profile on Spotify and Apple Music. I watched a live tracker of his streaming metrics on an industry website. His daily global stream count plummeted from 8 million plays to under 400,000 plays in a 12-hour window. The automated streaming algorithms registered the sudden, massive drop in user engagement. The code responded by actively removing his tracks from all curated, high-traffic editorial playlists. The Today's Top Hits playlist wiped his face from the cover graphic. At 1 p.m., the lucrative corporate partnerships dissolved. Byron held a $10 million global ambassador contract with a Swiss luxury watch brand. The company issued a press release on their official website and pinned it to their social media accounts. The statement read, "We value authenticity, transparency, and true creative integrity above all else. Effective immediately, we are terminating our relationship and all associated campaigns with Byron Rolls." A major acoustic guitar manufacturer followed suit exactly 30 minutes later. They pulled his signature acoustic model from their digital storefronts. They ordered physical retailers to remove the inventory from their sales floors. My phone rang. The caller ID displayed Clarence Rolls' personal cell phone number. I let it ring. The voicemail notification popped onto the screen. I tapped play. "Sabrina, pick up the phone," Clarence pleaded. His voice shook with panic. The smooth, authoritative tone from the conference room 5 years ago vanished entirely. "Byron is having a panic attack. The label is bleeding millions. Name your price to take the files down. We will wire $10 million to your account in 20 minutes. Just tell the internet it's a deep fake." I deleted the voicemail. I blocked the number. Byron Rolls transitioned from a global pop icon to a toxic industry pariah before dinner. The illusion burned to the ground. The ashes belonged to me. Part 5. The Rhythm Reclaimed. The legal battle commenced the following morning. Sapphire Records dispatched a formal cease and desist letter to my apartment via private courier. I handed the heavy envelope to my lawyer, Diane. She wore a sharp, tailored navy suit. Diane specialized entirely in the newly updated 2026 digital copyright and creator protection laws. We sat in a sprawling, glass-walled conference room in Century City. The head executives of Sapphire Records sat across the polished granite table from us. Clarence Rolls sat at the edge of the group, rubbing his temples. Byron Rolls skipped the meeting entirely. His publicist released a statement citing exhaustion. The executives looked defeated. Deep purple bags hung under their eyes. Their corporate stock price showed a 12% drop since my midnight upload. The shareholders demanded immediate stabilization. The industry's power dynamic shifted dramatically toward the original writers and the verifiable digital creators over the past 5 years. The new federal legislation recognized, verified, decentralized blockchain timestamps as absolute, legally binding proof of origination. My client holds the irrefutable digital provenance of the entire Aurora Visage album, Diane said. Her voice cut through the silence of the room. She placed my brushed metal hard drive dead center on the granite table. The non-disclosure agreement expired at midnight on October 12th. The public holds the truth. We are filing a federal lawsuit for comprehensive retroactive royalties. More importantly, we demand an immediate, global update to the writer metadata across all streaming platforms. The Sapphire executives stared at the hard drive. The small metal box contained their destruction. They lacked any viable leverage. The fan boycott bled their quarterly financial projections dry. The public demanded the original creator. We can offer a retroactive co-writing credit, the lead executive said. His voice cracked. And a generous royalty bump moving forward. We are past negotiations, Diane stated. You will surrender 100% of the publishing. You will issue a public apology validating Sabrina Beckett as the sole architect of the album. The lead executive looked at Clarence. Clarence nodded slowly. What do you want to settle today? the lead executive asked me directly. Everything, I said. I looked directly into his eyes. I want my name on every single track. I want the masters. I want the silence broken permanently. They capitulated completely within 48 hours. The contracts materialized. The signatures transferred the ownership. The rhythm returned to my absolute control. On Friday morning, I opened the Spotify application on my phone. I searched for the Aurora Visage album. The familiar album art loaded on my screen. I tapped the track details. Beneath the title of every single song, the writing credits showed a massive alteration. Byron Rolls' name vanished entirely. The screen displayed my name in bold, white letters, written by Sabrina Beckett. The victory required one final, definitive stroke. I booked the premiere recording suite at Sound City Studios. I walked into the historic building. Gold records lined the walls. I stood inside the main vocal booth. The vintage Neumann microphone hung suspended in front of my face. The heavy, foam-layered soundproofing isolated me entirely from the outside world. I closed my eyes. I breathed in the sharp, metallic scent of ozone and the warm, comforting smell of the heated vacuum tubes powering the recording console. I plugged my acoustic guitar directly into the pristine analog board. I sang House of Embers. I sang Rust and Ruin. I recorded the definitive, authentic versions of the songs stolen from me 5 years ago. I commanded the control room to keep the production completely stripped down. The mix featured only my intricate acoustic guitar picking and a raw, thumping bass line. I poured the soaring triumph, the fierce vindication, and the release of 5 years of suffocating silence directly into the microphone. I hit the high notes in the bridge with absolute clarity. The rasp in my voice conveyed genuine survival. We titled the new release Aurora Visage, The Architect's Cut. The album dropped globally at midnight. The pre-save numbers shattered platform records. I drove my newly purchased midnight blue Porsche 911 down Sunset Boulevard. The engine hummed with mechanical perfection. I pulled over at the busiest intersection in West Hollywood. I looked up at the massive, illuminated billboard towering over the street. The advertisement displayed a stark, highly contrasted black and white photograph of my face. I held my acoustic guitar. I stared down at the city with unyielding confidence. My name spanned the entire width of the billboard in massive, illuminated block letters. Sabrina Beckett. The Architect's Cut. Out now. The high-end speakers on my dashboard played the crisp opening chords of my acoustic guitar. I rolled the windows down. The cool night air rushed into the cabin. I listened to my own voice echo through the neon-lit streets of Los Angeles, loud, clear, and permanently undeniable. The end. Modern Queen Tales presents The Legacy of Sight. The cold metal of the clipboard pressed against my palms. A sharp draft cut through the sterile hospital air, carrying the scent of rubbing alcohol and bleached cotton. Carlyle's expensive leather shoes squeaked against the linoleum floor. He paced at the foot of my bed. The heavy scent of his Tom Ford cologne filled the small space, a sharp, spicy aroma that masked the stale hospital smells. "Sign the papers, Melina," Carlyle said. His voice lacked any warmth. A hard, flat tone echoed off the pale walls. "We are done pretending this works." My fingers traced the edge of the thick paper stack. The bandages wrapped around my eyes felt tight, a thick barrier of gauze and medical tape securing the results of the experimental corneal surgery. The doctors promised results. Carlyle promised nothing but impatience. "You bring divorce papers to my recovery room," I said. My voice remained steady, a quiet hum in my chest. Time moves forward, Carlyle replied. He stopped pacing. The mattress dipped near my knees as he leaned against the frame. I need my freedom. You need full-time care. A wife who requires a guide dog and a nurse is a liability in my circle. Delilah understands the demands of my position. She has the vitality for the social season. Delilah, the 22-year-old heiress to a shipping conglomerate, a girl whose perfume smelled of crushed orchids and spun sugar. You are leaving me for a socialite while my eyes bleed behind surgical gauze, I stated. I am moving forward with a partner who can actually see the empire I am building, Carlyle corrected. Feel the bottom right corner of the page. The pen is already there. He guided my hand. His fingers felt rough, a hurried pressure forcing the Mont Blanc fountain pen between my index finger and thumb. The cool, heavy brass of the pen settled into my grip. I take the liquid assets, the primary estate, and the voting shares of Gray Enterprises, Carlyle explained, reading a summary of the terms. You receive the quiet cottage in Vermont and a monthly stipend to cover your medical attendance. It is a generous settlement for a woman in your condition. My name was Melina Gray. The company bore my family name. My grandfather built the real estate empire from a single apartment building in Queens. Carlyle married into the family, adopting my name to secure his position on the board. I pressed the gold nib against the thick parchment. The ink flowed smoothly. I traced the curves of my signature, a muscle memory perfected over 30 years. The pen scratched against the paper, a loud, definitive sound in the quiet room. Carlyle snatched the clipboard the moment the pen lifted. A sensible choice, Carlyle said. The sound of metal snapping shut indicated he placed the documents into his briefcase. I have a flight to Milan with Delilah in 3 hours. The nurses have my lawyer's contact information. Goodbye, Melina. His footsteps retreated rapidly. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. Silence reclaimed the room. A soft knock broke the stillness 2 minutes later. The gentle squeak of rubber-soled shoes announced Dr. Eckert. Mrs. Gray, Dr. Eckert said. His voice carried a calm, melodic timbre. The swelling subsided nicely overnight. We are ready to remove the bandages. Proceed, doctor, I said. The cool touch of small surgical scissors snipped the tape at my temples. Dr. Eckert peeled the thick layers of gauze away. The sudden shift in pressure left my skin tingling. Keep your eyes closed, Dr. Eckert instructed. He wiped my eyelids with a warm, damp cloth. Now, open them slowly. Let the room adjust to you. I lifted my eyelids. A rush of blinding white light flooded my brain. Shapes swam in a chaotic sea of color. The harsh fluorescent lights on the ceiling burned bright. I blinked, once, twice. The blur sharpened into rigid lines. The edges of the television monitor, the soft blue of Dr. Eckert's scrubs, the deep brown of his kind eyes. I saw him. I saw the room. I saw the world. Perfect clarity, Doctor. Eckert whispered, shining a tiny, concentrated light into my pupils. Your retinas are responding beautifully. The graphs hold firm. Mrs. Gray, your vision is fully restored. A deep breath filled my lungs. The gray fog of the past 3 years evaporated. I stared at my hands, tracing the pale skin, the faint blue veins, the gold wedding band resting on my finger. I turned my head toward the small bedside table. Carlyle's haste resulted in a critical error. A slim, black leather portfolio rested against the plastic water pitcher. He took the clipboard, but he abandoned his secondary folder. Doctor, please hand me that black case, I requested. Dr. Eckert placed the cool leather on my lap. I unzipped the main compartment. Crisp white papers slid into my hands. My newly healed eyes scanned the sharp black text. The documents detailed a complex network of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Carlyle drafted aggressive plans to liquidate the primary holdings of Gray Enterprises within 30 days. He formed a new shell corporation, solely in his name, funded entirely by embezzled company money. A sharp, cold focus replaced the shock in my chest. Carlyle's arrogance caused a massive blind spot. He viewed my blindness as weakness. He assumed my physical limitation diminished my intellect. He entirely forgot the existence of the legacy clause. My grandfather, Arthur Gray, possessed a ruthless foresight. He embedded a secret, heavily guarded stipulation within the foundational trust of Gray Enterprises. The legacy clause dictated that control of the bloodline assets remained conditional. Any spouse marrying into the family forfeited all shares, titles, and capital immediately upon committing financial fraud against the estate or upon initiating a divorce devoid of mutual consent. Carlyle signed his own financial death warrant the moment he demanded my signature on those divorce papers while simultaneously draining company accounts. I zipped the portfolio shut. "Dr. Eckert," I said, locking my bright, clear eyes with his, "we need to keep this a secret. My husband believes I am permanently blind. For the next 7 days, the world must believe his assumption is correct." Dr. Eckert studied my face. He noted the iron resolve hardening my features. He nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement. "Your medical records will reflect a failed procedure," Dr. Eckert stated, tapping the electronic tablet in his hand. "Your secret remains safe within these walls." I returned to the sprawling Gray family estate the following morning. The heavy iron gates parted for the town car. The sprawling limestone mansion stood tall against the gray morning sky. I wore thick, dark sunglasses. I gripped the smooth wooden handle of my white cane. I tapped the brass tip against the marble foyer floor, maintaining the precise rhythm of my previous 3 years. "Melina," Carlyle's voice echoed down the grand staircase. "You returned early." I faced the sound of his voice. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, staring blankly at the middle button of his tailored navy suit. I saw the smirk playing on his lips. I saw the smudge of Delilah's bright pink lipstick on his shirt collar. "The hospital environment felt suffocating," I replied, tracing the wall with my free hand. "The surgery failed. The darkness is permanent." Carlyle let out a long, theatrical sigh. He descended the remaining stairs. "A tragedy. Delilah is in the solarium. We are hosting a small gathering for the board members this evening. You will remain in the East Wing." "Understood," I said. I shuffled toward the East Wing corridors, leaning heavily on the cane. The moment the heavy oak doors closed behind me, I stood straight. I removed the sunglasses. I walked with silent, predatory grace toward my private study. The week unfolded as a master class in deception. During the day, I played the helpless invalid. I sat in the garden, listening to the birds, feeling the sun on my face. I listened to Carlyle and Delilah mock my condition mere feet away. "She looks like a ghost haunting her own house," Delilah giggled one afternoon, sipping champagne on the terrace. Her blonde hair fell in messy waves across her shoulders. "She is a ghost," Carlyle replied, clinking his glass against hers. "By Friday, the liquidation completes. We sail to Monaco, and she rots in Vermont." I smiled, facing the rose bushes, my eyes shielded by the dark lenses. At night, the estate transformed into my hunting ground. The moment Carlyle's heavy snores echoed from the master suite, I slipped out of my room. I navigated the dark hallways with perfect vision. I entered his home office. The security keypad on the door proved useless against a woman who watched him punch in the code over his shoulder earlier that day. I booted up his desktop computer. I photographed every ledger, every email, every hidden bank routing number. I documented his direct transfers from the Gray Enterprises Employee Pension Fund into the escrow account for Delilah's new luxury yacht. I compiled a digital mountain of irrefutable evidence. On Wednesday afternoon, I slipped out the servants' entrance. A nondescript black sedan waited in the alley. I climbed into the back seat. Kyle Bennett, the senior partner of the family's law firm, sat beside me. He wore a sharp gray suit. His silver hair caught the dim light inside the car. "You look remarkably well, Melina," Kyle said, observing my clear, focused eyes. "The surgery succeeded, Kyle," I stated, handing him a thick, encrypted flash drive. "Carlyle intends to bankrupt the firm by Friday. The evidence is all there: embezzlement, fraud, and a unilateral divorce decree." Kyle plugged the drive into his laptop. His eyes scanned the documents. His jaw tightened. The quiet hum of the car engine filled the silence. "He triggered the legacy clause," Kyle confirmed, looking up from the screen. "Your grandfather designed this trap for exactly this kind of parasite. The divorce papers he forced you to sign act as the catalyst. The fraud seals the vault." "I want absolute destruction," I commanded. "Freeze the joint accounts, void his voting shares, revoke his corporate access, transfer the deed of the estate solely back into my name." "Consider it done," Kyle said. His fingers flew across the keyboard. "The legal filings process at 5 p.m. on Friday. The moment the banks close, Carlyle becomes a ghost." Friday arrived with a heavy, oppressive humidity. Thick black clouds gathered on the horizon. The air smelled of impending rain. Carlyle stood in the foyer, adjusting the velvet lapels of his tuxedo. Delilah draped herself over his arm, wearing a diamond necklace purchased with my grandfather's money. "We are attending the charity gala downtown," Carlyle announced, speaking loudly as if my blindness also affected my hearing. "Do not wait up. We plan to celebrate late into the night." "Have a wonderful evening," I said, seated in a high-backed leather chair by the fireplace. My cane rested across my lap. The heavy front doors slammed shut. The engine of his Aston Martin roared to life and faded down the driveway. I stood up. I tossed the white cane into the roaring fire. The wood snapped and hissed. I removed the dark sunglasses and crushed the frames beneath the heel of my boot. The clock struck 5. I picked up the phone and dialed the estate security chief. "Deactivate all access codes for Carlyle," I ordered. "Change the locks on the main gates. Pack his belongings in the lowest quality garbage bags available and place them outside the perimeter fence." The storm broke at 8 o'clock. Lightning shattered the sky. Thunder shook the foundation of the house. Sheets of heavy rain washed the marble driveway. I stood in the grand foyer, wearing a crimson silk dress. The house blazed with light. Every chandelier burned bright. I held an electronic tablet in my left hand. The headlights of the Aston Martin pierced the driving rain at midnight. The car stopped abruptly at the locked iron gates. The horn blared, a sharp, angry sound cutting through the thunder. I opened the front doors. I stepped onto the covered portico. The cold wind whipped my hair. Carlyle jogged up the driveway, holding a newspaper over his head. His tuxedo clung to his skin, completely soaked. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He stared at the 4 black garbage bags sitting in puddles on the concrete. "What is the meaning of this?" Carlyle yelled over the rain. He swiped wet hair from his forehead. "The gate code is broken! Who put my clothes in the rain?" I walked to the edge of the porch. I looked down at him. I made direct, piercing eye contact. "The code works perfectly for authorized personnel," I said. My voice sliced through the storm. Carlyle froze. His eyes widened. He dropped the wet newspaper. He looked at my eyes, tracking his movements, locking on to his panicked gaze. You can see," he stammered, taking a step back. I see everything, Carlyle, I stated. I saw the divorce papers you forced on me. I saw the embezzlement ledgers you left in the hospital room. I saw you kiss your mistress in my home. Listen to me, Melina, Carlyle said, raising his hands, his voice adopting a desperate, placating tone. We can discuss this inside. You misunderstand the financial transfers. I activated the legacy clause. I interrupted. The words struck him like physical blows. His shoulders slumped, his mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by pure, visceral terror. The offshore accounts are frozen. I continued, pacing the length of the porch. Your corporate credit cards are declined. Your voting shares reverted to the trust. At 5 o'clock today, you possess exactly nothing. You cannot do this, Carlyle screamed, stepping toward the porch. I built the modern division of that company. I am the CEO. You were the CEO, I corrected. I tapped the screen of the tablet. A grid of faces illuminated the screen. The entire board of directors of Gray Enterprises watched us through a live video feed. I invited them to witness the transition of power. Gentlemen, I addressed the tablet, holding it up so the camera captured Carlyle standing in the rain. As you reviewed the documents I sent earlier, Mr. Carlyle Gray embezzled $40 million from our pension funds. He is no longer affiliated with this company. Kyle Bennett's face appeared in the top left corner of the screen. The police received the full dossier an hour ago, Carlyle, Kyle stated through the tablet speakers. Warrants for your arrest on charges of corporate fraud and grand larceny are active. Carlyle stared at the glowing screen. The flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers cut through the darkness at the end of the street, reflecting off the wet pavement. Delilah, Carlyle whispered, turning toward the gate. The Aston Martin reversed rapidly. The tires squealed on the wet asphalt. Delilah recognized the police sirens. She chose self-preservation over her ruined lover. The taillights disappeared down the road. She left you, I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. A woman with her vitality requires a man with an actual bank account. The police officers approached the gate. The heavy iron bars slid open on my command. 2 officers flanked Carlyle, pulling his arms behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked loudly over the sound of the rain. Carlyle looked up at me one last time. The water streamed down his face. His expensive suit hung in ruins. He looked small, pathetic, and entirely broken. "Melina, please!" he begged, a pathetic whimper escaping his throat. "Remove him from my property," I instructed the officers. I turned my back on the arrest. I walked inside and pushed the heavy oak doors shut. The click of the deadbolt locking echoed through the warm, dry foyer. The ensuing month brought total devastation to Carlyle's life. The media devoured the scandal. Front-page headlines detailed his financial crimes and his cruel attempt to discard his blind wife. The courts froze his personal assets to pay back the embezzled funds. He sat in a county jail cell, awaiting trial, abandoned by his high society friends and his young mistress. The crushing weight of debt and public humiliation buried him. I sat at the head of the massive mahogany table in the Gray Enterprises boardroom. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. 20 board members sat in silence, watching me. "The restructuring is complete," I announced, placing my hands flat on the polished wood. "We recovered the stolen assets. We stabilized the pension fund. The company moves forward under my direct leadership." The room erupted in a chorus of agreements. They respected the power. They respected the ruthless execution of justice. I opened a thick blue folder resting in front of me. "Our first new initiative," I stated, pulling a silver pen from my pocket. A $50 million grant establishing the Arthur Gray Ocular Research Center at the Metropolitan Hospital. We fund the future of vision restoration. I signed the document with a firm, practiced hand. The ink dried instantly. I stood up from the table. I walked toward the expansive windows. The city skyline stretched out before me, a jagged landscape of glass and steel rising into the clear blue sky. I looked at the horizon. The details of the buildings stood sharp and defined. The colors vibrated with intense clarity. The world belonged to me, bright, clear, and perfectly focused. The end. Modern Queen Tales presents Always Plan for Betrayal. The glow of Adam's unlocked MacBook illuminated the dark mahogany of his study desk. A silver flash drive, the exact one missing from my workbench in the basement, jutted from the side port. I stepped onto the Persian rug, my bare feet sinking into the wool, and approached the desk. Adam slept upstairs in our master suite, heavily sedated by a combination of expensive scotch and his own suffocating ego. He had left his laptop open, a rare slip of his usually meticulous security habits. I touched the trackpad. The screen flared to life, revealing two open windows that rearranged the entire architecture of my reality. The first window displayed an official document from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The title read, "The Synapse Core, a Neural Link Data Interface." I scanned the text. The technical specifications, the intricate hardware schematics, the thousands of lines of foundational algorithmic logic, they were all my precise, painstaking work. 3 years of my life, coded in the dead of night, soldered under a magnifying lamp while my eyes burned with exhaustion. Under the field labeled Inventor, the document proudly displayed a single name, Adam Argent Duchard. A hard, icy block settled in my stomach. I dragged the cursor, minimizing the patent filing to reveal the window layered directly beneath it. It was a messaging application. The most recent photo showed Julie, Adam's newly appointed vice president of marketing, tangled in the white linens of a hotel bed in Geneva. The timestamp placed the message during Adam's solo investor tour last week. Her accompanying text sat below the image. "Can't wait to celebrate your genius tomorrow at the launch, baby. The Duchard legacy is secure." Adam's reply followed. "You have no idea. The world changes tomorrow, and that little basement hobbyist is completely clueless. I've already transferred all the core files to the Orpheus servers. The patent cleared. We own it." I stood perfectly still in the quiet study. The air conditioning hummed through the brass floor vents. The scent of cedarwood and expensive leather filled my lungs. I processed the information with the same analytical detachment I applied to my code. My husband of 4 years had stolen my life's work, claimed it as his own, financed its production with his family's generational wealth, and planned a life with another woman using the profits of my intellect. He viewed me as a convenient, naive asset, a quiet, nerdy wife who spent too much time tinkering in the basement while he played the charismatic visionary in the boardroom. I reached into my pocket, withdrew my encrypted phone, and photographed the screen. I captured the patent filing, the transfer logs, the timestamps, and the messages. I ejected the silver flash drive, slipped it into my pocket, and closed the laptop, leaving the screen exactly at the angle I found it. The Duchard family built their empire on shipping logistics in the 19th century and expanded into global venture capital in the 20th. They possessed absolute power in financial circles. Adam launched Orpheus, his new tech startup centered entirely on my Synapse core, using a massive capital injection from the Duchard family trust. His father, Richard Duchard, had co-signed the venture, leveraging their historic real estate portfolio and international shipping assets as collateral to secure the billions needed for global manufacturing. They expected the Synapse core to make them trillionaires. I returned to our bedroom. Adam snored softly, his handsome, patrician face relaxed against the silk pillowcase. I lay down beside him, staring at the ceiling, and began to architect his destruction. The next morning, Adam adjusted his silk tie in the mirror. He radiated a smug, electric energy. "Tonight is the night, Dahlia," he said, shooting me a dazzling smile through the reflection. "The Orpheus launch. Silicon Valley is going to bow to the Duchard name. I am very proud of you, Adam," I said. My voice held steady, perfectly modulated. I handed him his platinum cufflinks. "You worked so hard for this." "It takes a visionary to see the future," he replied, sliding the cufflinks into place. "I couldn't have done it without your support, Dahlia. Letting me bounce ideas off you, watching you tinker with your little side projects, it inspired my final design." The sheer audacity of his lie hung in the morning air. He actually believed he possessed ownership of my creation simply by proximity and theft. He believed his money and his name transmuted my genius into his property. "I cannot wait to see you on stage," I said. I spent the next 3 months perfecting my silence. As Adam scaled Orpheus globally, hiring thousands of employees and building a monolithic glass headquarters in San Francisco, I played the supportive, quiet wife. I attended the galas. I smiled for the paparazzi. I shook hands with senators and tech moguls who praised Adam's transcendent intellect. Behind the scenes, I executed a flawless, invisible strategy. I hired Marlon Connolly, a ruthless, deeply connected intellectual property litigator who operated out of an unmarked office building in D.C. I handed Marlon a pristine sequence of cryptographic proof. I provided the original GitHub repositories hosted on a private server I maintained since my days at MIT. Every single commit, every line of code, every hardware diagnostic report contained embedded, verifiable timestamps proving my authorship years before I even met Adam Duchard. "This is a total kill shot," Marlon said, reviewing the digital forensics on his massive monitor. "He essentially copy-pasted your entire neural architecture. He didn't even bother to rename your private variables." "Adam is arrogant," I explained, sipping black coffee in Marlon's office. "He doesn't understand the code. He only understands the application of the code. He saw a working prototype and assumed the software was a simple, static product he could just lift." "And the Duchard family trust?" Marlon asked, pulling up the public financial disclosures of Orpheus. "Adam used the family trust to guarantee the manufacturing loans for the hardware," I said. "He cross-collateralized his entire bloodline. If Orpheus fails, the creditors have legal authorization to liquidate the Duchard estate to recover the manufacturing debts." "When do we file?" Marlon asked. His eyes gleamed with predatory anticipation. "We wait for the global deployment," I said. "We wait until the devices are in the hands of the consumers. We let the financial liability reach its absolute maximum." Adam failed to audit the software. He hired top-tier engineers to build the user interface and the sleek hardware casing, but they treated the core algorithmic engine, my code, as a black box. They were explicitly instructed by Adam not to alter the core logic, terrified they might break the genius he claimed to have written. Because they never audited the core, they never found the Leviathan protocol. I always build contingencies into my systems. The Synapse core was designed to interface directly with human neural patterns, transferring massive data packets in milliseconds. Such a powerful tool required a failsafe in case the prototypes fell into the hands of corporate espionage. Deep within the firmware, disguised as a routine memory garbage collection subroutine, I hid a specific logic bomb. It required a unique cryptographic handshake to remain dormant. The system looked for a ping from my personal encrypted server every 30 days. If I sent the kill command, the Leviathan protocol would execute. The code would command the microcontrollers to enter an infinite, cascading loop. The hardware would overheat, fuse the delicate internal processors, and permanently brick the device. The data transfer protocols would simultaneously scramble, rewriting the operating system into random alphanumeric static. The hardware would become expensive, melted paperweights. The date of the global consumer launch arrived. Orpheus hosted the event at the Moscone Center. 3,000 investors, tech journalists, and celebrities packed the auditorium. Millions more watched the live stream. The stage featured a massive, curved LED screen displaying the sleek Orpheus logo. I sat in the front row, wearing a tailored, black Alexander McQueen dress. Richard Duchard sat to my left, leaning on his silver-handled cane. Julie, the mistress, sat a few rows back, wearing a diamond tennis bracelet I recognized from our joint bank statements. Adam stepped onto the stage. The crowd erupted into applause. He wore a black turtleneck and jeans, a calculated uniform of technological royalty. He paced the stage, a headset microphone resting against his jaw. "Today, we redefine the limits of human potential," Adam announced. His voice boomed through the pristine sound system. "The Synapse Core is no longer a concept. It is a reality. As of this morning, 4 million units have shipped globally to our pre-order customers. Hospitals, financial institutions, and individuals are plugging into the network right now." He paused, letting the magnitude of the moment wash over the crowd. "We are tracking the live activations," Adam said, gesturing to the massive screen behind him. The screen shifted, displaying a global map. Thousands of glowing blue dots began to populate across North America, Europe, and Asia. The crowd clapped. The Duchard family legacy was actively expanding its empire across the digital realm. I reached into my Prada clutch and retrieved my phone. I opened a customized terminal emulator application I built precisely for this moment. The interface displayed a simple black background with a green command prompt. I typed the execution phrase, Leviathan, initiate. I pressed enter. I looked up at the stage. Adam continued his speech. The speed of data transfer will. The massive screen behind him flickered. A sharp, high-pitched whine emitted from the stage speakers. One of the glowing blue dots on the global map suddenly flashed crimson red, then disappeared entirely. Then another. Then 10. Then 1,000. A cascading wave of red swept across the global map. The blue lights vanished, consumed by a rapidly expanding darkness. Adam stopped speaking. He turned around, staring at the screen. "We seem to be experiencing a minor visual glitch with the telemetry map," he said smoothly. He tapped his earpiece. "Control room! Reset the feed!" A man in the second row suddenly cursed. He held an Orpheus demo unit in his hands. A thin wisp of acrid gray smoke curled from the charging port. The sleek glass screen cracked down the middle with a sharp pop. Across the auditorium, other journalists and VIPs began dropping their demo units. The devices were overheating rapidly, burning their palms. The sharp smell of melted plastic and fused silicon filled the cavernous room. Adam's face went completely pale. He tapped his earpiece frantically. "Talk to me!" he hissed into the microphone, forgetting to mute his broadcast feed. "What is happening to the servers?" I watched the exact moment Adam Duchard realized he was witnessing the fiery end of his entire life. The realization washed over his features, stripping away the arrogant veneer and leaving a terrified, confused man standing under the harsh stage lights. My phone buzzed. A message from Marlon Connolly appeared on the screen. All kill commands verified. Global hardware failure is at 100%. The system is dead. I replied, "File the injunctions." Panic consumed the Moscone Center. Investors shouted into their phones. Tech journalists aggressively filmed the smoking devices scattered across the floor. Security personnel rushed the stage, escorting a shell-shocked Adam behind the massive LED screen. Richard Duchard gripped his silver cane, his breathing heavy and ragged. "What in God's name did he do?" the old man wheezed, staring at the smoking debris. "Adam made a miscalculation," I said quietly, standing up from my seat. I smoothed the front of my dress. I walked out of the auditorium, leaving the chaotic noise behind me. The crisp San Francisco air hit my face as I exited the building. A black town car waited at the curb. I climbed inside, poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the mini fridge, and watched the financial markets begin their brutal, automated response. The dismantling of the Duchard dynasty occurred with terrifying, algorithmic speed. Within exactly 12 minutes of the Moscone Center disaster, Orpheus's stock plummeted by 94%. The market halted trading, but the damage was terminal. 4 million consumers now held useless, melted hardware. Hospitals filed immediate emergency injunctions regarding corrupted data. The class action lawsuits began forming before the hour concluded. At precisely 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Marlon Connolly filed our intellectual property lawsuit in the federal court. The filing was a 500-page masterpiece of lethal litigation. It contained the indisputable cryptographic proof of my ownership, the logs of Adam's theft, and an explicit demand for the immediate transfer of all patents, trademarks, and associated intellectual property back to my sole possession. Alongside the IP lawsuit, Marlon filed a massive fraud claim against Orpheus and its primary backer, the Duchard Family Trust. We demonstrated that the entire financial foundation of the company was built on stolen assets. Adam attempted to call me 42 times that afternoon. I blocked his number and drank a cup of green tea in my hotel suite overlooking the bay. The true devastation lay in the cross-collateralization. Adam's arrogance had convinced his father to guarantee the manufacturing loans using the Duchard family's historical assets. The creditors, massive international banks completely devoid of sentimentality, watched the global failure of the product and the immediate, undeniable proof of IP theft. They realized Orpheus was completely insolvent and facing billions in fraud penalties. The banks executed the Dominion clauses in their loan agreements. They triggered an immediate call on the collateral. 2 days later, the repo men arrived at the Duchard family estate in Connecticut. I received real-time updates from a private investigator I hired to document the collapse. He sent photographs of federal marshals changing the locks on the heavy iron gates of the Duchard Manor. He captured images of moving crews carefully carrying out Richard Duchard's prized collection of original Dutch masters. The fleet of vintage Aston Martins and Rolls-Royces were loaded onto flatbed trucks, destined for liquidation auctions. The Duchard Family Trust was entirely frozen. The court appointed an independent receiver to strip the family of every liquid asset, every property, and every offshore account to satisfy the mounting debts of the Orpheus collapse and my fraud settlement. Adam returned to our shared home in Silicon Valley to find my belongings entirely gone. My clothes, my books, my servers, all vanished. The only item left in the house was a manila envelope sitting on the kitchen island. The envelope contained 2 documents. The first was a divorce petition, citing his infidelity with Julie, accompanied by the photographs I took from his laptop. The second document was a formal notice of his complete financial ruination. Adam finally cornered me 3 weeks later. Marlon Connolly arranged a mandatory mediation session in a sterile glass conference room in downtown San Francisco. Adam walked through the doors looking 20 years older. The bespoke Tom Ford suit hung loosely on his frame. The manicured confidence was gone, replaced by the twitchy, hollow exhaustion of a man who had lost his entire universe. Richard Duchard sat beside him, requiring an oxygen tank. The patriarch glared at me with a mixture of pure hatred and dawning terror. I sat across from them, wearing a sharp gray pantsuit. Marlin sat to my right, organizing a thick stack of finalized court orders. "You planned this," Adam rasped, his voice scraping against the quiet room. "You let me build the company. You let me take the loans. You knew the whole time." "I knew you stole my property," I said. My voice offered no emotion. "I knew you were sleeping with your marketing director. I simply allowed your own actions to reach their logical, inevitable conclusion." "You destroyed my family," Richard Duchard wheezed. 200 years of legacy. Gone. We are being evicted from our own homes, Dahlia. My grandfather built that estate. Adam destroyed your family, Richard. I corrected him. Adam leveraged stolen property. You co-signed the fraud. The market corrected the error. I am simply reclaiming what belongs to me. Adam slammed his fist on the glass table. You bricked the devices. You caused the failure. The devices functioned exactly as I programmed them to, I replied. You claimed you invented the software. If you were the inventor, you would have understood the architecture. You would have removed the security protocols. Your failure to comprehend the technology you stole is the sole cause of the hardware failure. Marlin slid a heavy document across the table. This is the settlement agreement, Marlin stated. My client assumes total ownership of all patents, trademarks, and source code associated with the Synapse core. My client also assumes ownership of the physical Orpheus headquarters, which we purchased out of bankruptcy receivership this morning for pennies on the dollar. Adam stared at the document. His hands shook. Sign it, Adam, Marlin said. If you refuse, we proceed to criminal trial for the IP theft and the wire fraud. The federal prosecutors are waiting for my call. You will serve 20 years in a minimum security facility. Adam picked up the heavy gold pen. He looked at me, searching my face for a flicker of sympathy. For the quiet, compliant wife he thought he married, he found only the cold, unyielding architecture of the trap he walked willingly into. He signed the document. The Duchard dynasty officially ended on page 47. 6 months later, the final accounting concluded. Adam and Julie moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a deteriorating section of Oakland. Julie left him 3 weeks later when she realized the Duchard money was never coming back. Adam secured a job managing a regional logistics warehouse, an ironic echo of his family's original shipping empire. A significant portion of his meager paycheck was garnished to pay the remaining, insurmountable legal debts he accumulated during the fallout. Richard Duchard passed away in a modest assisted living facility, the stress of the total financial collapse accelerating his failing heart. The historic Duchard Manor was purchased by a foreign investment conglomerate and turned into a boutique luxury hotel. I stood in my new office on the top floor of the building that formerly belonged to Orpheus. The massive glass windows overlooked the San Francisco Bay. The gold lettering on the reception wall now read, Stratton Technologies. My engineering team, a group of brilliant, meticulously vetted individuals who actually understood the code, sat in the conference room, waiting for my final approval. We stripped the Leviathan protocol from the firmware. We refined the power distribution arrays and optimized the neural handshake logic. We built the hardware correctly, utilizing ethical supply chains and robust, transparent manufacturing processes. The original vision, my vision, was finally ready for the world. I looked down at the city. The sun reflected off the water, bright and sharp. There was a distinct mathematical purity to the entire process. I bypassed the messy, emotional confrontations of a standard betrayal. I ignored tears and screaming arguments. Instead, I applied logic. I allowed arrogance to act as a force multiplier for destruction. I let the thief build the castle, and then I triggered the structural collapse from within the foundation. I walked into the conference room. My lead engineer looked up from his tablet. "We are green across all diagnostic boards, Dahlia," he said. "The Synapse core is stable. Deployment ready. Initiate the launch," I said. I sat at the head of the table and watched the telemetry map populate with steady, unbreaking lights. The system worked flawlessly. I reclaimed my work, my life, and my future. The equation was perfectly balanced. The end.
Modern Queen Tales presents The Overhaul. The grainy security footage playing on my cracked smartphone screen captured the exact moment my life shattered. A digital clock in the corner of the video file stamped the time in harsh white numbers. 11:42 p.m. I watched the replay weeks later, the memory burning a hole in my stomach. The camera, mounted directly above the industrial espresso machine, offered a bird's-eye view of my humiliation. My reflection in the dark glass of the storefront window showed a woman running entirely on fumes. I stood behind the cold marble counter of the downtown Seattle Class Cafe franchise. I wore a stiff polyester apron stained with 3 different types of milk, sticky caramel syrup, and dark espresso grounds. My lumbar spine throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache from 14 consecutive hours of standing on hard concrete. The store manager, Lewis Coleman, stood opposite me. Lewis possessed the slick, over-caffeinated energy of a man who equated cruelty with leadership. He wore a crisp, charcoal grey, tailored suit that cost more than my monthly rent. A heavy gold Rolex watch gleamed on his left wrist. He slammed his palm against the counter. The ceramic tip jar rattled, the few coins inside clinking against the sides. He held my printed bank statement in his right hand. I dropped the folded paper near the register hours earlier, when trying to calculate if I could afford to turn on my apartment's heating unit that month. "Look at this," Lewis sneered. His voice echoed off the white subway tile walls, loud and piercing in the empty cafe. $14.32. "This is pathetic, Jacqueline." "That fell out of my bag," I said, reaching across the counter for the paper. "Give it back." Lewis snatched the paper away. He waved it above his head, like a flag of my defeat. "You asked for overtime. You begged for this double shift. You told me you were dedicated to the Class Cafe family. But this," he flicked the bank statement with his index finger, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "This shows a fundamental lack of personal responsibility. Poverty is a personality trait, Jacqueline. It shows laziness. It reveals a chaotic mind. I cannot have a chaotic mind managing my inventory. I work 60 hours a week," I stated. My voice sounded tight, stretched to the breaking point. "The regional rent index just spiked 40%. A gallon of milk costs $9. I am working as hard as I can." "Excuses," Lewis barked. He crumpled the bank statement into a tight ball. He dropped the paper into the wet sink, filled with dirty, steaming pitchers. "You are a liability. Your financial desperation makes you a theft risk. Turn in your apron. You are terminated, effective, immediately." The words hit my chest, like physical weights. The 2026 economy offered 0 safety nets. Hyperinflation had turned basic survival into a luxury commodity. The tech conglomerates owned the housing blocks, the grocery chains, and the utility grids. Getting fired meant immediate eviction. Eviction meant the streets. "Lewis, my rent is due in 3 days," I said. I gripped the edge of the marble counter, my knuckles turning white. "Then you should have developed a better personality," he replied. He turned his back to me and walked toward the office door. "Get out before I call building security to escort you off the premises." I untied the knot at the back of my neck. I folded the stained apron into a neat square, placed it beside the register, and walked out into the freezing November rain. The walk back to my micro-apartment took 45 minutes. The icy downpour soaked through my worn canvas sneakers completely by the second block. The wind whipped off the Puget Sound, biting through my thin denim jacket. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my unit, the hallway, smelling of boiled cabbage and damp carpet. I sat on my bare mattress that night. I wrapped a single scratchy wool blanket around my shoulders. I stared at the flashing red light of my empty refrigerator. The compressor hummed a low, mocking tune. I had $14.32 to my name. I had 3 days to find $2,000. I needed a miracle. I decided to create one instead. For 2 years, between grueling barista shifts and during my mandated 30-minute lunch breaks, I coded. I sat in the cramped break room, ignoring the smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, typing furiously on a refurbished laptop, missing 3 keys. I built a highly complex, predictive logistics algorithm. I designed the software to optimize supply chain waste for localized retail. I called the architecture Pristine Flow. The system used real-time weather data, local event schedules, and historical purchasing trends to predict exact inventory needs, down to the hour. The morning after Lewis fired me, I walked to the local public library. I claimed a desktop computer in the back corner. I blasted emails to the acquisitions departments of the top 10 tech conglomerates in Silicon Valley. I bypassed the standard submission portals. I used my coding background to scrape the direct email addresses of the senior vice presidents of acquisitions. I attached a localized demo of Pristine Flow. I used publicly available ClassCafe logistics data to fuel the simulation. I demonstrated exactly how my algorithm could save their massive retail divisions 22% in quarterly perishable waste. I highlighted the massive profit margins they currently bled out through inefficient ordering. 3 days later, my phone vibrated on the cheap laminate table of my apartment. The caller ID displayed a San Jose area code. A senior representative from Oakmont Global Corporation spoke to me for 20 minutes. 5 days later, I boarded a first-class flight to San Francisco on a ticket they purchased. 7 days later, I sat in a glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor of the Oakmont Tower, overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. I stood at the head of a massive mahogany table. I demonstrated the live code to a room of 12 executives. I ran simulations using their proprietary data, showing them the exact millions they wasted every month. The lead acquisitions director, a woman with sharp green eyes and a sharper white blazer, leaned forward. She rested her elbows on the polished wood. "This algorithm is flawless, Miss Bolton. The integration period looks incredibly brief. We want exclusive ownership." The number they offered stopped my breath. The document she slid across the table contained an 8-figure sum. The wire transfer cleared the following Tuesday. I sat in the lobby of the First National Bank in downtown Seattle. I rested my phone on my lap and watched my banking application refresh. The screen changed from $14.32 to $18,500,000 and $14.32. The glowing green numbers formed a digital shield against the terror of the past week. Most people in my position would buy a mansion in the hills. Many would buy a private island in the Caribbean and disappear. I bought the ClassCafe Pacific Northwest regional franchise rights. I hired Benson & Donovan, a specialized corporate acquisitions firm located in a high-rise downtown. I sat in a leather armchair in their penthouse suite and gave explicit instructions to my lead attorney, Abraham. I directed them to approach ClassCafe's national headquarters with a quiet, highly aggressive buyout offer for the entire tri-state district. Corporate headquarters cared about one single metric: liquidity. The regional district, managed by Lewis Coleman, showed a steady 3-year decline in employee retention. Customer complaints regarding service speed and store cleanliness had spiked 40% in the last quarter. Corporate viewed the Pacific Northwest District as a toxic asset. They viewed Lewis Coleman as a liability they had not yet found the time to sever. I viewed the entire operation as a target. Abraham handled the complex negotiations. He leveraged the all-cash nature of the offer to bypass standard franchise waiting periods. Corporate headquarters jumped at the influx of capital. I returned to Abraham's mahogany-paneled office for the final signing. The massive stack of deeds lay on the polished wood surface. The documents transferred absolute ownership of 42 storefronts directly to my newly formed holding company, Bolton Enterprises. The transfer included all real estate, all commercial equipment, and every single employment contract in the district. They accepted the cash offer without a single revision, Abraham said. He tapped a heavy Mont Blanc pen on the desk. You are officially the ultimate landlord of the entire district. You own the buildings. You own the espresso machines. You own the corporate structure. Lewis Coleman now reports directly to you. I picked up the pen. The weight of the metal felt cool and solid in my hand. I signed my name on the dotted line of the final page. The ink dried quickly on the heavy cardstock. The signature permanently shifted the power dynamic from discarded, starving employee to sole proprietor and absolute authority. I spent the next 3 days meticulously preparing for my return to the downtown location. I visited a bespoke tailor on Fifth Avenue. I walked into the hushed, velvet-lined showroom. I selected a midnight blue wool silk blend suit. The master tailor pinned the fabric to my frame, ensuring the drape fell perfectly. The resulting garments looked structured, commanding, and expensive. I paired the suit with a crisp white silk blouse and handmade Italian leather loafers. I scheduled a professional blowout at a high-end salon. My hair fell in sleek, polished waves over my shoulders. I wanted my physical presence to reflect the absolute financial and structural authority I now wielded. I wanted Lewis to see his complete destruction before I even spoke a word. On a rainy Thursday morning, at exactly 8 a.m., I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the downtown Seattle Class Cafe. The familiar, overwhelming smell of roasted espresso beans, vanilla syrup, and commercial floor sanitizer washed over me. The morning rush hummed with chaotic, frantic energy. Customers lined up out the door, checking their watches and tapping their feet. The baristas sprinted behind the counter, sweat beading on their foreheads. The hiss of the steam wands drowned out the low ambient music playing from the ceiling speakers. Lewis Coleman stood near the glass pastry case. He held his familiar metal clipboard. He yelled at Laura, a barista who had worked at this location for 3 years. You call this a display? Lewis barked. He pointed a thick, manicured finger at a row of almond croissants. They are asymmetrical. The labels are crooked. Fix them immediately. You are moving like molasses, Laura. Do you want to join Jacqueline in the unemployment line? Because I can make that happen right now. I stepped forward. My leather loafers clicked loudly and sharply against the polished concrete floor. Laura is doing an excellent job, I said. My voice sliced cleanly through the ambient noise of the cafe. Lewis spun around. His face flushed with immediate anger. His eyes scanned my midnight blue suit, my polished hair, and the sleek leather briefcase in my hand. His brain struggled to process the visual information. He recognized my face, but the context completely defied his understanding of reality. Jacqueline? Lewis stammered. He lowered the clipboard slightly. What are you doing here? You are trespassing. Get out before I call the police. I walked directly to the marble counter. I placed my leather briefcase flat on the surface. I clicked the dual brass locks open. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet of the front area. I pulled out a thick manila folder containing the legally binding franchise transfer documents, complete with the embossed corporate headquarters seal. I am not trespassing, Lewis, I stated. I slid the folder across the smooth marble. I am inspecting my property. Lewis stared at the folder. He looked back at me. A tight, condescending smile formed on his thin lips. Have you lost your mind? Did the poverty finally break your brain? You need psychiatric help. Read the first page, I commanded. Lewis opened the folder. His eyes darted across the heavy cardstock. I watched the blood drain rapidly from his face. A sickly pale grey tone replaced the angry flush. His hands began to tremble violently. The metal clipboard slipped from his grip. It clattered loudly onto the concrete floor, the papers scattering everywhere. Bolton Enterprises, Lewis whispered. He read the corporate entity name out loud, his voice shaking. Sole proprietor, Jacqueline Bolton. I bought the district, Lewis, I said. I leaned closer to him across the counter. Every espresso machine, every bag of coffee beans, and every single employment contract, including yours. The cafe fell entirely silent. The customers stopped murmuring. The steam wands shut off. Laura dropped a pair of metal pastry tongs on the counter. This is a joke, Lewis choked out. He took a stumbling step backward. Corporate would never sell a district to a barista. This is forged. Corporate sold the district to a tech millionaire, offering a massive all-cash buyout. I corrected him. I am the regional owner. I am your direct boss. You are my subordinate. And we are implementing immediate changes to this environment. I turned away from his pale face to address the stunned staff behind the counter. They stared at me with wide eyes. Effective immediately. The empathy first corporate policy replaces the previous guidelines, I announced to the room. Base pay for all floor staff is raised to $30 an hour, starting with this current pay period. Full medical, dental, and vision benefits begin on day 1 of employment, retroactively applied to all current staff. Mandatory paid 30-minute breaks occur every 4 hours. A comprehensive profit-sharing structure kicks in at the end of this quarter. Laura covered her mouth with both hands. Tears welled in her dark eyes and spilled over her cheeks. The rest of the staff erupted into massive cheers. The sound bounced off the subway tile walls, bright and full of sudden hope. Customers in the line started clapping. I turned back to Lewis. He looked incredibly small. His shoulders slumped, and he looked terrified. Lewis, my office, I said. I pointed toward the heavy metal door of the back room. Now. The manager's office remained exactly as I remembered it. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the small room. Stacks of printed inventory sheets covered the scarred metal desk. A calendar on the wall showed the grueling shift schedules. I walked behind the desk and sat down in the high-backed leather manager's chair. Lewis stood awkwardly near the door. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, clutching his hands together. Sit, I ordered. He sank into a hard plastic folding chair opposite the desk. The chair creaked under his weight. We are conducting a formal performance review of your tenure as regional manager, I began. I opened a second, much thicker folder I brought from my briefcase. I spent the entire day yesterday reviewing the district's human resources logs, exit interviews, and anonymous staff surveys from the past 3 years. Jacqueline, please, Lewis started. His voice cracked in the middle of my name. I followed standard corporate optimization protocols. I had strict quotas to meet. The district directors demanded high margins. You weaponized financial insecurity to maintain control, I replied. I pulled out a stack of printed testimonies. I hired an independent firm to reach out to the staff members you terminated over the past 2 years. I have a signed statement here, from Leo. You fired him because he requested 1 single weekend off to study for his university final exams. You told him his engineering degree was worthless compared to coffee service. Lewis swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the scuffed linoleum floor. I have a statement from Sarah, I continued. I slid the crisp white paper toward him. A single mother of 2. You deliberately cut her hours to 29 a week, specifically to prevent her from qualifying for the company health insurance tier. You then mocked her in front of the morning shift when she asked for an advance to afford her daughter's asthma medication. The labor margins were extremely tight, Lewis whispered. He wiped a drop of sweat from his forehead. Your personal bonus structure depended entirely on keeping labor costs below poverty wages. I countered. You profited directly from their daily suffering. You bought tailored suits and Rolexes with the money you stole from their benefits. That ends today. I pulled out a red felt tip pen from my jacket pocket. I uncapped it and drew a thick, vicious line through his employment contract details on the top page. Your corporate Tesla lease is revoked. Hand over the keys, I demanded. Lewis's hands shook uncontrollably as he reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out the sleek black keycard and placed it gently on the metal desk. Your regional performance bonuses are permanently dissolved, I continued, striking another line through the document. Your corporate expense account is closed. Your corporate housing stipend for the penthouse apartment is cancelled. You will now experience the exact financial reality you forced upon your staff for years. You can't do this, Lewis pleaded. He gripped the edge of the metal desk, his knuckles white. I have a massive mortgage on a second property. I have luxury car payments. I have enormous monthly expenses. I will go bankrupt. You should develop a better personality, I stated, echoing his exact words back to him with lethal precision. You need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, Lewis. Manage your chaotic mind. Poverty is just a personality trait, remember? Are you firing me? He asked. His voice broke completely, shrinking into a pathetic whine. Firing you gives you the immediate release of severance pay and standard unemployment benefits, I said. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the desk. No, I am demoting you. You are now an entry-level maintenance trainee for this specific location. I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out a standard-issue Class Café polyester apron. It was stiff, scratchy, and brightly coloured. I tossed it across the desk. It landed squarely in his lap. Your new duties include deep cleaning the industrial grease traps under the sinks, scrubbing the baseboards with a toothbrush, and manually detailing the public restrooms every hour, I listed. You will work the closing shift, from 4 p.m. to midnight, 6 days a week. You will clock in and out, using the biometric scanner, by the door. If you are 1 single minute late, your pay is docked according to your own handbook rules. You are permanently banned from operating the espresso machines and the cash registers. Lewis stared at the crumpled apron in his lap. The cheap fabric represented everything he despised in the world. 2 weeks later, I sat at a corner table in the cafe. I drank a perfectly poured cortado from a ceramic mug. I wore a tailored grey wool blazer over a black silk turtleneck. I watched the ecosystem of the store function flawlessly. Laura laughed brightly with a regular customer while ringing up an order on the tablet. The baristas moved with relaxed efficiency. The atmosphere felt light, highly productive, and genuinely healthy. The tension that used to choke the room had vanished completely. The heavy metal door of the back room swung open. Lewis walked out. He carried a heavy yellow mop bucket filled with soapy water and a thick, heavy-duty scrub brush. He wore the polyester apron over a cheap white t-shirt. Dark, foul-smelling stains of industrial cleaner, floor wax, and rancid grease covered his uniform. His posture slumped completely. Deep, bruised circles shadowed the skin under his eyes. His hands looked red and raw from the harsh chemicals. He dragged the heavy bucket toward the front entrance. He dropped heavily to his knees on the hard floor. He began scrubbing furiously at a set of black scuff marks on the concrete near the door. I placed my coffee mug on the table. I stood up and walked slowly over to him. I stopped a few feet away and looked down at his hunched, miserable form. "Lewis," I said softly. He stopped scrubbing. He dropped the brush into the bucket. He looked up at me. His face looked tight, with extreme exhaustion and deep humiliation. "I am offering you a choice today," I stated, my voice calm and even. "Option 1. You stand up, right now. You apologize loudly to every single staff member on this floor for the years of emotional abuse and financial terrorism you inflicted upon them. Then, you resign. You walk out that glass door with absolutely nothing." He gripped the plastic handle of the scrub brush, sitting in the dirty water. "And option 2? You stay," I said. I gestured to the bucket. "You remain on this floor as a maintenance trainee. You earn the strictly controlled, unlivable minimum wage you championed for years. You follow the exact restrictive, punishing employee handbook you personally authored. You experience the grueling physical toll of the labor you exploited for your own gain. You live the actual reality of the 2026 working class." Lewis looked slowly toward the front door. He looked at the heavy rain pouring down on the grey Seattle streets. He thought about his cancelled housing stipend, his revoked Tesla, and his completely empty bank accounts. He had massive debts he could no longer service. He had burned every bridge in the corporate world with his newly publicized HR records. The irony crashed over him in a visible wave. He had spent years meticulously building an inescapable cage of poverty for his employees, and now I had locked him securely inside it. He slowly lowered his head. He reached his raw, red hands into the bucket. He pulled out the scrub brush, water dripping onto his shoes. "I'll finish scrubbing the baseboards," he mumbled. He turned away from me and began scrubbing furiously at a dark stain on the concrete. I watched him work for a long moment. I turned and walked back to my corner table. I picked up my warm coffee mug. The 2026 labour market had mutated into a harsh, unforgiving landscape. Corporate giants routinely crushed the working class under the massive weight of hyperinflation and impossible productivity demands. But inside the walls of Bolton Enterprises, the era of the toxic boss was entirely dead. True accountability had finally arrived, and it carried a scrub brush and a yellow mop bucket. The end. If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.